燃え上がれガンダム。Hello, and welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, the bonus summer podcast brought to you by the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I'm Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here to continue our deep dive into the wacky, the woolly world of Gundam by discussing the original anime series, Mobile Suit Gundam. Jonathan, I am very excited to talk about it today. A lot of shit happens in this batch of episodes. We are discussing episodes 26 to 38. This is part 4. And there are only 5 episodes left of Gundam after what we discussed today.
And that's kind of where I want to start, Sean.
Yeah.
I finished this batch of episodes yesterday, and I immediately texted you and said, Sean, how the fuck are there only 5 episodes left of Gundam?
And I immediately texted back, shit gets real.
See, I already feel like shit got real. So I'm like, it's not real yet? I believe you, but oh my god. Yeah, this is the biggest batch of episodes we've done so far. It's 13 episodes. It goes from the episode Char Returns to Sayla and Char. So you can tell Char is an important character in this batch of episodes, which is great. We get Char back. We have the Gundam crew really having become a full-fledged crew at this point, and they are a well-oiled machine in this batch of episodes. And Amuro is becoming so good in the Gundam that by the end of this batch, you're like, wait a second, something's up with Amuro. And yeah, this is a phenomenal batch. I think there are a couple tiny weak spots I could point to in this batch because just so much happens and it's such a vast stretch of story. I can maybe point to a few more little weaknesses than I could in other batches, but overall, it's the same consistent level of quality we've had, and it is also barreling towards a climax, and that just means, like, you know, I've said before, I in the early episodes, I liked to kind of watch one episode at a time and digest it. I was doing 2-3 episodes at a time and holding myself back so I could pace it out and process it more, because that makes for a better conversation on here. Mm-hmm. And then, as I was telling you off the air, when I finished the episode last night, Sayla and Char, I just wanted to go watch the next episode, episode 39, and I was like, no, that's not how this project works. Jonathan can't know what's coming next. Sean knows what's coming next, and he's not telling us. So, yeah, it's nuts. This show is great. Oh my god.
Yeah, Gundam is really fucking good. Yeah, this stretch of episodes has some of my absolute favorite stuff. And it's a very this is a very momentous episode of Weekly Suit Gundam for me personally, Jonathan, because you have no idea how hard it has been doing this without ever using the word new type, knowing everything I know about what Gundam is, and it blows my fucking mind every time I realize that word is not said in the original series until episode 38, which is the last episode we have.
And here's what's funny. I know the word new type. I don't think you have to know a lot about Gundam to have heard the word new type. I just assumed it meant a new type of armor, right? Like, if you didn't know Gundam, that's what you would think. They're all in giant mech suits. The new type is, I assume that's Gundam Mark II. That's what I thought, because I think it's impossible to not know the words Gundam and new type. It's out there in the ether.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, that's what, okay. This series is not what I thought it was. Wow.
Yeah, it is, because when I watched it the first time, I was in the same boat of, like, I knew that there was a concept called new type that was related to Gundam. I didn't know if it was in the original Gundam show or if that was a different Gundam thing. I didn't know if it was a kind of mech or what. Yes, but it is, new type is a huge thing in Universal Century Gundam. And we are finally now. They have been planting the seeds along the way. Like the first time it's hinted at is way back. I think in episode 9 is the first time it gets sort of hinted at. But yes, now I can just say the word new type and not be afraid of spoiling shit.
Well, thank you. I now I look at this and I'm like, that must have taken restraint. But I've thought that for a lot of things now that I'm hitting this batch of episodes. Just like Char's motivations and things like that, you know, or Char's real name and all those sorts of things. It's a wild set of episodes, and man, I'm so happy we're watching it. This is quickly becoming one of my favorite podcasts to record because it's also a show that it's really good to have someone to talk to and process what's going on.
Yeah, it's dense. There's a lot of stuff. And so I think for this episode of Weekly Suit Gundam, probably the easiest way to tackle this batch is kind of what we did for part 2, where I think it's probably easiest to chunk these episodes together, because most of these are like 3 to 4 long episode arcs, really, which is something that Gundam hasn't done that much of. Generally, Gundam has had very, very standalone episodes that fit into big, like 13 episode arcs, like bit by bit, where this feels like it's more of each episode is still standalone. We've got a couple of like maybe more two-parters like The Glory of Solomon and Big Zam's Last Stand and Duel in Texas and Char and Sayla are definitely more two-part kind of episodes. But all of these definitely are fitting into these kind of tighter 3 to 4 episode chunks.
Yeah, I mean, and I was surprised to see there is a straight-up two-parter here with The Glory of Solomon and then Big Zam's Last Stand, as you said, there's a battle left unfinished, which is really the only time Gundam has done that so far. And then the last two are kind of obviously connected, but it's not quite that clear. But yeah, it does work in that sense because the overall goal of these episodes is the movement through space. I mean, we're basically in the last section of the military campaign against Zeon.
Yeah.
And this whole section is it starts with Amuro and friends getting jumped into the military, basically. They all get ranks, and they are all officially military members now. It is them meeting up with the fleet and the battle at Solomon, and then some of the aftermath with that. But yes, I think the way it works in little arcs is actually very effective. And it's good to start at the beginning there, because the first little arc, which centers around the character Kai, is incredibly effective.
Yes, so we have our first 3 episodes to talk about today. Episode 26, Char Returns, 27, A Spy on Board, and 28, Across the Atlantic Ocean. This is like it's the Northern Ireland and Miharu section. So after the Battle of Edessa, the White Base has gone to Northern Ireland for repairs and to get orders. General Revel is there also, so you have some scenes of like all the people on the White Base getting promotions and they're getting orders, and General Revel is like shaking hands with people and all that kind of stuff. And all the while, we focus in on Kai and his sort of arc of he kind of has to have his coming home moment that Amuro had of he leaves the White Base. He has to kind of like he gets this choice of whether or not he wants to voluntarily be a member of the White Base or whether or not he wants to ditch it and live his own life. And then he meets Miharu and he has his little adventure. And this is one of my favorite like little sections of Gundam, because I really like whenever Gundam has this opportunity to focus in on one of its side characters, and Kai is a character that has been with us the whole time, but they up till this point they don't really have a strong lens on him the way they will occasionally, like, here's an episode where Sayla has a lot of stuff. Here's an episode where Bright has a lot of stuff. We didn't really have that with Kai, and so they have this nice little arc with him that I think is really, really good.
Yes, and we'll get to the Kai and Miharu stuff, because all of that is indeed excellent. But I also just love the setting of these 3 episodes, with it being in Northern Ireland. It's built around, like, ocean and, like, naval combat more than any other episode of Gundam. Well, all of it is naval, but it's usually sky or space naval, not literally on the water. And so you have all of the Zeon mobile suits that are just, like, they're like submarines, and you have the Gundam trying to fight underwater. And I look back at that list of episodes, and I can't believe this was only 3 episodes. That the first episode alone, Char Returns, which does not have much to do with Char at all, which is fine, but it's like he returns in like one scene. But like that episode, so much happens in terms of everybody getting their ranks and getting commissioned, and all the stuff with the first underwater battle and the White Base getting repaired. And I remembered that being like 2 or 3 episodes, because you also meet Miharu there, and Kai runs into her before we ever learn her name. But Miharu, when I look back, she's only in 3 episodes. That's insane to me. And I know we've said this multiple times, and I should be prepared for this with Gundam now. But again, the storytelling economy is so tight, it still kind of blows my mind. It feels like it's working outside of the normal narrative space-time continuum.
Yeah, because it definitely, you look back on the Northern Ireland stuff and it feels like that's like a season of a TV show is what it feels like. That's not a small 3-episode arc in this 43-episode anime. And yeah, so which is true of like most of the stuff here. And it is always amazing to me as someone who has watched through the show twice. Like, I still have that element of it of like, holy shit, like, you know, especially coming close to the end, remembering all the stuff that has to happen in the next 7 episodes, in my mind is like, that's like 10 episodes. It has to be. No other anime would be able to accomplish that in anything less than 10 episodes. Most anime would have to have like 20 episodes to do some of this stuff. And Gundam does it in like 3 to 5. And it's, yeah, the storytelling economy is ferocious. And yet they always find time for those little tiny moments that I love. Like, I love the scene where Amuro catches Kai leaving the base, and Amuro goes and gets his fucking little toolbox and runs up to give it to Kai, and is like, hey Kai, like, this is a parting gift, like, you can sell it to get some money. And Amuro is just such a sweet little kid when he is given an opportunity to not be like a fucking killing machine. He's just such a nice little boy, and I love those little moments.
And then I love Kai's return, where he brings it back and in just the most Kai fashion imaginable says, that didn't sell for anything. That was worthless, Amuro. And yet I think it endears Amuro to him even more, because it's Kai's way of saying thank you, really.
Yes.
But no, beautiful, beautiful moment and scene between those two there, and both bookends of that. But yeah, I mean, before we talk about Kai, I do, just because this stuff fascinates me, I want to talk about their commissioned ranks. Because I thought that was really interesting. That Bright, who was an ensign, which, this is also funny, that Bright, he's a captain because he is the leader of a ship. Like, in naval tradition, like, if you are the commanding officer of a ship, you are called captain, even if that is not your rank. He's a captain before he's even a commissioned officer, because he doesn't become a commissioned officer until, I think, the previous batch of episodes when they name him ensign, which is the lowest rank of a commissioned officer. And then in this one, he is lieutenant. He is Bright Chewy, which is great. Chewy is the best name for... I love that word in Japanese.
Yeah, we've
so
had
good.
A couple, like Matilda was Matilda Chewy, and yes, it's a good sound to throw at the end of a name.
And I know we'll meet this character later, but I just have to say it now. Strega Chewy is my favorite name in Gundam. It's like that in Jobjun, how they say it in Japanese. Strega Chewy is so good. We'll get to him later. But yeah, so he becomes a lieutenant. I think Mirai, what does she become? She's
I forget. She's pretty high, right?
She's pretty high. Sayla's pretty high. Fraubo becomes a seaman, I think.
Yes.
Something like the equivalent of that. And then Amuro becomes chief petty officer, which is pretty good for him. Pretty good for just starting out.
Going from someone who was a civilian that like had access to military secrets that could have had him executed, to going from that to being chief petty officer, that's a fucking big jump. You know?
It is a big jump.
He's almost at the same level as Master Chief from Halo. He's almost there.
Yes. So that's pretty good for him. And you've got, I think most of the pilots become petty officers first, second class. I think Kai is like second class.
Yeah.
And in the midst of this, you also get, they promoted Ryu up to, what was it?
Everybody who died gets 2 ranks up from whatever they were.
So I think he became like 1 up from lieutenant is what it is, because he jumps Bright. And then that leads to a really interesting scene where Amuro kind of, like, because Amuro has this really nice moment where he's looking at the certificate for his chief petty officer status, and he says, I haven't gotten something like this since grade school, or something like that. And he's thinking about it, and he's like, there's this internal debate, am I proud, or am I kind of weirded out by this, right? And then he hears that Ryu got promoted up, and it's like, well, wait, that's all you did? Like, he fucking died for us, and he gets 2 promotions, and that's it? And, you know, General Revel, and even Bright, are just kind of like, yeah, that's what happens. And Amuro's like, that's insane. This is nuts. And that's a really powerful moment, too, because it shines a light on, like, this is a significant moment for our crew. In theory, this is all something to be very proud of, being promoted like that. And then you hear it with Ryu, and if you are an outsider like Amuro, you realize, no, wait, that is kind of nuts. They didn't actually do anything to honor him there.
Yeah, he just sort of flips out and he says this like, you know, you don't even say like thank you or anything. You just like, because it's just some random officer that's giving it out, and it's just like, you don't give us anything. It's like, there's nothing more useless in the middle of this war where everything is like just fucked, and there's like the chain of command is all fucked up and crazy. And so there's even for the normal military people, there's very little sense of like the standard military hierarchy being something that is intact and important. But especially for the people on the white base, what the fuck does it matter? Like, Amuro's not actually a soldier, really, properly. Like, he just kind of, as you said earlier, he got jumped into the military. And so from his perspective, all of the kind of the decorum is utterly pointless because this is not the life he chose. Like, you can't like imagine that like Amuro immediately after the 1 year war goes and like, yeah, like great military, awesome, I'm gonna officially enlist and become a Federation, whatever, you know, like that's not clearly the thing that he's interested in. He's just stuck in this bizarre scenario and they give him a fucking piece of paper, and so of course he's gonna get mad about it.
Yeah, no, good scene, and I just wanted to mention that. But the star of the show here is Kai, and of course Miharu, who I do like in that first episode that Miharu is just kind of around the fringes. And it's a thing, this is part of Gundam's storytelling economy, is that single scenes often do many different things. And so you can have a scene where they're like passing through the base and getting to where they're going, and Miharu will be out there with her flowers. And at first you just think she's a person out in the world in this kind of dilapidated town who's selling flowers. You get the sense that she's up to something. You get the sense that Kai is into her. But those scenes are not like stopping to introduce Miharu.
Yes, exactly. So it's really important that you just get familiarized with what she looks like and her basic sort of role of this woman who's just like trying to sell random goods to these soldiers, who's clearly very poor and has something to take care of. So you already have the basic setup for that character done before you really meet her properly in episode 27.
Yes. And then before we get to episode 27, just talk about what's the name for like the underwater Zakus they're using?
So there's a couple of new mobile suits we get introduced, because this is also the section where we find out that Zeon has just sort of pushed every single prototype mobile suit they had in development. Because of the Gundam, they've just sort of pushed all of those out there. So this is like the beginning of the spree of a bunch of new mobile suits and mobile armors.
And they're so good. They're all so good. We'll get to my favorite one. My favorite one is in episode 37. We'll talk about that. But there's a lot.
Yes, so the underwater ones we get the Gog, which that's the most Zaku-esque. It's like kind of just the whatever throwaway one.
Also Gogu is great for an underwater mobile suit.
Yes, the Gogu is really good. And then we also get the Zagok, which is the bigger, kind of bulkier one that has the big fucking claws that eventually Char gets his red Zagok later on. And so we have that. I think there's also the Zok. I think that's the one that pops up in Jaburo. That's like the big weird green one with a bunch of missiles on it. But yeah, we have this whole class now of like aquatic Zeon mobile suits that are starting to be deployed.
And they're so good. Like, you know, I love the Gundam and I love the Federation mobile suits. They look really cool and fun. The Zeon mobile suits are where it's at. I love every single goddamn one of them, from the original Zaku all the way up to these, to the ones we're going to get in the later episodes. They are just so creative and full of personality, and I love all the rounded edges, and I love how like the Gog and all those and the Zgok look genuinely amphibious. Like, I want to meet in this show the Zeon mobile suit designer, and what a fucking madman that person is, because it feels like they're like, I don't know, the fucking Johnny Ive of mobile suits, where they're like, we're gonna make it look really cool, and like they're putting that above everything else, because oftentimes they're not the best mobile suits, but they do look really good.
They look really good. They have, I like they have like their one like red eye motif that they're like, this is our thing. This is like the Zeon thing. We put a big red eye on all of our mobile suits because it looks very cool. I also really like with the aquatic mobile suits, they all have like those big rounded tops, and then they have little holes that have like little torpedoes. So when they're underwater, they basically become like really fast submarines, and they just shoot torpedoes at the top of their head, which is a really like well thought out, I think, design element of why these things are really effective underwater. Is they're able to effectively, without like literally transforming, they practically transform into underwater vehicles when they're underwater, and then when they're on land, they can do the whole mobile suit thing and stand on two legs.
Yes, it's very cool. But Miharu. Poor Miharu.
Yeah, so she's a Zeon spy who is just trying to take care of her little brother and little sister. And I love just all the stuff of Kai leaving the base, running into her, going up to the cabin with her, and Kai like immediately knows what's really going on. And I love that whole dynamic of him, he checks her like picnic basket thing with all her goodies in it that she's trying to sell, and underneath it she has a gun, and he just says like, oh well, yep, this isn't good. And that whole process of Kai understanding the situation that Miharu is in and helping her just enough that like she can kind of support and keep on going on, but obviously trying to make it so that he doesn't help her enough that it's going to jeopardize the white base in any way. Like that whole dynamic and seeing like the compassion that Kai has in this situation is really good, and it's a really good detail that kind of helps flesh out Kai, who's a character that's always been kind of a jerk, but you've always could tell he's kind of the jerk with a heart of gold character, and seeing him removed from everything else, it really highlights that aspect of his character.
But in these two episodes, what I find most compelling is that he's not careful enough about the white base, and he is so disillusioned that I think he doesn't know where his loyalties lie. Not that he's going to defect to Zeon, he's not doing that, but he's genuinely disillusioned to the point of fuck it, I'll go help my friends because they are in immediate danger, but then it's over, and I'm still not going to rat out Miharu. I'm not going to, try to get her onto our side. He doesn't, try to get her to defect or anything like that. He just doesn't stop her, and he doesn't stop them. And he lets her on the ship, and it ultimately does result in a big battle. It does ultimately result in her death, and he is very laissez-faire about it, and I feel like up until near the end of that third episode when he jumps back in the gun cannon and everything, and he and, I guess they're in a different suit at that point, but he and Miharu go out together and fight for the white base. I feel like he doesn't genuinely know where his loyalties lie and whether or not this is something he truly cares about, and you can feel that conflict working on him through all three episodes because he is so fed up with this shit, and I understand why he's fed up with this shit. And I think that's really compelling because it's a different arc than Amuro's. When Amuro left and had his coming home moment, or in the next set of episodes when he deserts for a little while, he never stops fighting for the Federation, in terms of trying to do what the Federation wants in a broad sense. Kai is I fuck all this shit, I'm done, and that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, if Zeon had not chosen that moment to attack the harbor, and Kai just could directly see everybody in danger, because Kai is super important, because after they lost Ryu, they don't have enough people to properly pilot all the machines they have, because Sayla pilots the G-Fighter, Amuro's on the Gundam, Hayato's on the gun tank. Kai is the only other person that can really pilot the gun cannon. I think Job John technically can pilot some of those things, but he's Job John. He's not, he's not good enough to be someone you can actually rely on. So him kind of seeing that and I think he realizes that he is really needed on the white base, even if the whole context of what they're doing and the fact that they're just being kind of jerked around by the Federation brass is he's right to be fed up with all that stuff. I like that moment when he's standing on the hill and seeing the white base under attack, and he's just like, oh, come on, guys, you can do better than this. And he just runs down the hill, gets into the gun tank. And then there's a really good sequence in that fight of Amuro fighting, I think it's the first Zagok, he fights underwater, and then Amuro jumps out of the water in the Gundam, and Kai's waiting there with the gun tank for the Zagok to follow him, and then shoots the Zagok, and then Amuro comes down and cuts in half with the Gundam. There's some nice team play that starts happening there.
Yes, and also all the animation in this stretch. It's always good on Gundam. I feel like these 13 episodes have some of the best animation, and I love all the stuff in Northern Ireland, the colors on the hills and the specific sky tones they choose, and then everything with the water. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, they definitely get to play with a different color palette, which is nice, because it captures that sense of it's very green, but the sky is almost always overcast, and so it definitely captures that kind of England, Ireland kind of out in the countryside kind of look, and it is a very different aesthetic from space or the desert, which is most of where Gundam is in.
Yes. And then talking about Miharu, this show is never exactly subtle with foreshadowing death, and that's, I think, one of the ways, actually, it's good at killing characters, is it sets the groundwork for it to mean something. It is not just about shocking you. But boy, when Miharu goes home and she has these young orphan children with her, and they're her siblings, and she has to say goodbye because she's gonna have to leave for a while, but here's some money, take care of yourselves, kids. I was just head in my hands like, oh God, what is Tomino, you motherfucker, what are you gonna do to this woman? She doesn't deserve it. And what he does to Miharu is, I think, the best executed death sequence in Gundam so far. I don't know if it's the absolute most impactful, just because like someone like Ryu or Matilda we've known longer, but in terms of like, I think the cinematic qualities of it, holy fuck.
Yeah, because the whole scenario is so unique, because we're very accustomed to in media the like, I'm gonna fly in and sacrifice myself to like keep you alive kind of death that Ryu has, but it's the meaninglessness of Miharu's death, which is basically an accident, because they get into the gun parry, which is the big kind of gunship that's loaded up with torpedoes, and the torpedo gets stuck and Miharu's with Kai. And so she goes to like manually operate the lever because it's because the electrical circuits get shot out, and so they have to manually release the torpedoes. But since she's never done that before, she has no training. She clearly does not know that like you have to strap yourself in or something. Like you have to attach yourself to the gun parry if you're launching the torpedoes, or you're just going to get knocked away by the blowback. And the exhaust, and that's exactly what happens. And she just gets knocked out of the side of the gun parry. It's another instance of this big dramatic death happening and nobody realizing for like a solid 3 to 5 minutes of the show. Like you see Miharu get flown out of the side of the gun parry. You like see her like fall away, and Kai, but the torpedo hits its mark, and so Kai is celebrating and is flying the gun parry back, and then it cuts to Kai crying on the floor of the white base, having discovered that she's not there anymore.
And just that series of shots, it's 2 or 3 shots,
yeah.
But she fires the cannon, she gets flung out, and then it is a shot of the gun parry and her like hovering over the water in slow motion as she's falling. And that's it. And it's like, that's what I mean by impact, is despite the foreshadowing, it is genuinely surprising, because like that whole episode, I'm waiting for her to die, right? Because you know it's going to happen. Tomino has made it abundantly clear he's going to kill this woman. And you're waiting, and it's a giant battle, so you're thinking they're going to get hit by something, or, that torpedo that she's sending out it's not going to go right or something. But it just to be, the blowback of it just flings her off, and she's lost, and no one's ever going to know exactly how it happened, is so painful and hard, and like poor fucking Kai, like what he has to carry with him in terms of like, that is in no small part his fault in a dozen different little ways.
Yeah.
And like everyone on the white base knows, but no one's going to tell him that, because clearly he's suffering enough and he has learned his lessons, and no one deserves that. It's a very powerful sequence. And again, as you've said many times on the show before, Sean, but the way information propagates through episodes of like, we see something and then the characters have to learn it. It's not just taken for granted. That is always one of the great sources of power in Gundam, and that death really capitalizes on that.
Yeah, and it is, because it always strikes me every time I've seen this episode of there's something so real about the way that it happens, that it doesn't feel like it's the staged movie TV death sequence. But it's something that feels like like I'm sure that kind of shit has to happen all the time. Like think of all the stupid ways that like normal people just die in real life through weird accident or whatever happens, slipping on a bathroom tile, like that kind of thing that just kills people all the time. And in the middle of this like really like profoundly dangerous life of living on a battleship in the middle of this big war, like it's not just you getting shot down in a big heroic death. Any small innocuous thing is dangerous enough to kill you, and the way that it's executed is so haunting, seeing her fling off like that. And then you also get that really powerful sequence at the end of the episode where Kai is sort of sobbing on his own, and they do this very, like, I feel like we're getting into the stretch of Gundam where it starts getting very, very stylized when it wants to, where now, because you have that whole sequence where Kai is just sobbing on a pitch midnight black background, and then this weird, like, really detailed portrait of Miharu kind of hangs over him, and he imagines things that she's saying to him about that it's going to be okay, that my brother and sister are going to live a better life than we were able to. Like all that, the things that she never said to him, but he's like imagining that she maybe would say, like that. It's such a interesting sequence that is a very different, like Gundam has up to this point never tried to do something quite stylized in that way. And I think it helps sort of get you into Kai's head and push him to the place where he is now for the rest of the show, of him being much more dedicated and committed member of the White Base, because he, I think, now understands maybe some of the importance of ending this war. Whether it's Zeon who wins or the Federation who wins, I think now Kai understands like the suffering that war causes and the reason why these kids are, you know, orphaned and like truly orphaned now without even Miharu to take care of them. All of that is because of the war. And so he has this renewed purpose by the end of that episode.
Because he's someone who was detached from it. Like, that's our introduction to him in episode 2, is Sayla just finds him out there, like, leaning against a wall being cool because he's too cool for all this shit, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of his stance throughout. Even when Ryu dies, he is a little detached from it. And this is, okay, the war comes home to him. And it hits him, and it hits us, as it has many times in the past. And rest in peace, Miharu.
Rest in peace, yeah. That also reminds me of before Kai runs down the hill to rejoin the White Base. I love he has that moment where he's like sort of wavering, and then there's this little montage of him remembering, because he says like, why should I have to go to the White Base after all the shit that happened to me? And then he has flashbacks to fucking immediately, it's just from one of the early episodes where Bright just punches Kai out on the bridge of the White Base, and then everybody getting mad at him and yelling at him like Amuro. And then at the end of that montage is that scene, the first scene we see him in episode 2, where Sayla calls him a coward, and that line echoes in his head, and that's what causes him to run down. And that's a really well executed sequence of, you see Kai processing everything that happened to him and having to sort of steel himself.
Yes. That's also something to note in this set of episodes. Gundam is the rare anime that when it cuts back to footage from previous episodes, it's not killing time, it's doing it because it has to, and they get through it really quick. You don't sense that the anime team wants to kill time with this. It's just like, we need to see those shots, so let's go through them. Usually when an anime cuts back to footage from previous episodes, it's 10 minutes and half the episode, and they are doing it because they are just running against the manga as hard as they can.
Yes, they're running against the manga, or they just don't have any time, and so they're like, well, fuck it. Instead of doing a recap episode, let's just have this be like 5 minutes of this fucking fight scene that Amuro is remembering. Like Gundam Seed, which is a much later, it's like a Gundam show from 2000, has a really funny version of that, where they clearly ran out of time in the second half of the show. And so they probably show about a dozen times this clip of one of the main characters getting killed by a shield flying into his fighter that he's piloting. And I swear to God, you see that dude get killed more than you see Krillin blow up in Dragon Ball. But yes, the original Mobile Suit Gundam does not have that problem. When it chooses to employ flashbacks, it's a very deliberate thing, not like a time-saving measure.
Exactly. All right, so then we're going to have the stretch of episodes in Jaburo, which is also very good.
Yes, and I just love Gundam names always, and whether it's names for characters or names for locations. We haven't even heard the best location name yet. We're getting that next time. But Jaburo in South America, the hidden Federation secret base. Jaburo is such a good fucking name for this like secret military location hidden in like the Amazon rainforest.
Indeed. And this is an interesting set of episodes. I really like the first one, Tragedy in Jaburo, where you get there and you see it's the general headquarters of the Federation, right?
Yes, yeah. At this point, this is where the Federation is headquartered.
Yes, and you get Char and his, I'm looking at the name here, custom MSM-07 Zegok, which is very cool. And you have a really good fight there, and a little bit in the next episode. I really love Tragedy in Jaburo. The episode A Wish of War Orphans, I will have to say, I think is one of the weaker episodes of Gundam. We'll talk about that when we get there.
Yeah, it definitely is.
But I do think that one episode, Tragedy in Jaburo, again, I felt in my head like they spent 5 episodes in Jaburo, and mostly I'm just remembering that one episode because it's a small thing, but you meet this guy, I forget his name, but the man...
Captain Woody.
Captain Woody. God, every name. every name is so good. But Captain Woody, who was Matilda's fiance, they were going to get married, and he's exactly who you think Matilda would be engaged to, right?
Yes.
He is a similarly good, committed, moral dude, right? And, meets Amuro, and he has no ill will towards any of these people. In fact, exactly the opposite. He's like, if Matilda fought for you, I'm fighting for you. And as soon as you meet him, in my head, I'm like, they're gonna get the episode's called Tragedy in Jaburo. This fucking dude, he's not long for this earth, and he's not. But he gets a good death, and it is part of a really cool underwater, aren't they going through the caves at that point?
Yes, yeah, it's Amuro and him are fighting, Char through the caves of Jaburo, yes.
It's also one of the most direct cases of Char himself killing a character we know and like.
Yes.
Right? And, has Char killed anyone that directly, like his own hand?
No, I mean, the biggest thing he's done is, orchestrate the death of Garma. But
but we don't like Garma in that way.
I mean, I like Garma in that way. Garma's he's a nice kid that was born on the wrong side of the war.
Yes.
He didn't deserve to get fucked like that.
No, but he's not Matilda's, fiance who's trying to help our heroes, I guess I'll say.
Yeah, he's definitely not he's a character that the Garmin needed to die. You definitely want desperately Captain Woody to survive. And it is again, in my memory, Captain Woody must be around for 3 episodes of the show. It's nope, he is introduced and killed in the same episode. And normally that would feel so cheap if in most other shows doing it. Somehow Gundam just pulls it off flawlessly because you feel like you spend time with this guy. And most of it is that they know exactly what scenes they need to show. And I love that scene where after everything has kind of settled down, the white base is getting repairs, Amuro goes and finds him and talks to him about Matilda, and that's where he finds out that that they were going to get married after Odessa Day. It wasn't even just that they were planning on getting married, it's that they were planning on getting married a week ago and a week after she died. And so it's a very short stretch of time there. And Amuro has that flashback or not a flashback, but this is daydream of Matilda at her wedding and all the white base people are there. And it's this really sweet, cute moment. And it's Gundam knowing that that's exactly the kind of scene we need to establish Woody. And I love that Amuro doesn't have some weird jealous thing directed towards Woody, because I think that would feel artificial and fake. And I think it would make us not like him. That both Amuro and Woody, it would kind of put us against both those characters. And so them just having Amuro realizing that his dumb crush thing was just a dumb crush thing and wishing that Matilda would have been able to have that kind of happy moment. That's such an effective way to build this Captain Woody guy before we have Char brutally murder him.
And when Char brutally murders him, doesn't Amuro see the vision again and it shatters?
Yes.
Which is, I mean, that's such good planning to set it up and knock it down like that. Yeah, no, again, doing this in one episode, it's crazy. I feel like if Tomino was given the 13 episodes to conclude Game of Thrones, the way the Game of Thrones people were, he'd be cut 3 of those episodes off and I'll do it just fine.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's plenty of time.
It's ridiculous. And then in this episode, you just have, I think, the assault on Jaburo is also really cool. It's one of the better, big battle sequences in the show. And especially because we have Char as a kind of, point character, and we're following him. And I love that, he jumps off the dropship in his Zagok with 2 other guys, and those 2 other guys immediately get shot down. And, there's something about that makes it feel really real, that it's not Amuro having to get into a big fight and then he kills the 2 other dudes, which is how kind of every fight with Char went in the early part of the show, where he's fighting Char and a couple of other guys, and he's not able to get Char, but he's able to get Lieutenant Slender or whoever. But yeah, so all Char's guys get gunned down, and so then Char has to sneak in and find the Zok, and where they're going in, they decide to do a pincer attack. And the moment when Amuro sees Char's red Zagok and realizes it's Char is... I mean, any moment where Amuro and Char have a scene together are the best moments in the show. And that just the shot of the Zagok, which has just I think impaled a GM through the chest with his big fucking spike claws. And then it's crouching down, and in slow motion it stands up as Amuro's looking at it horrified. And then it does a cut into the cockpit as at the same pace Char's head lifts up and does that little Char smirk. And it's the best fuck yeah moment we've gotten in a long time in the show of just like, while episode 26 was called Char Returns, Tragedy in Jaburo is where Char is back, baby, and he's just up to his bullshit, and it's fucking great.
It's fucking great. I think it's this episode or the next one where we get a little bit of Char almost losing his shit of, like, getting frustrated, like, how are they killing all my people this fast? Like I feel like, I don't know if the last 5 episodes have this, but I feel like we might be headed towards his Light Yagami moment where he loses his cool and goes fucking crazy. I'm referencing the end of Death Note where Light Yagami finally goes off the fucking rails. I don't know if that's going to happen to Char, but I know that, I forget the name of the actor, but I know he could sell it. He could sell it like
Ikeda?
Yes, he could sell it. Because he goes a little bit. He goes like 25% of the way in that episode. That's great. But yes, any moment with Char's. I mean, because also the previous set of episodes we talked about with the just parade of death was so sad, and it was so relatively devoid of those fuck yeah moments that Char gives you. I'm glad we kind of get it, and those episodes needed to be that way.
Yeah.
But now that we're it shows us that we're moving past it a little bit, that we can have Char come back and do his little smirk. And I'll also say, you know, Char is, if this show has 3 main characters, it's Amuro, Bright, and Char.
Yes.
Any other show, if you told me you are not going to learn the third main character's motivations until episode 38, which is what happens in this show, you do not know Char's motivations until episode 38. And even then, there's still some things to be revealed. But, like, other than knowing he hates the zombies, we really don't know what this guy is up to. Doing that for 38 episodes is insane. It should not work. It works because the character is that expressive, he is that entertaining, and the performance by Ikeda is just that fucking, like, delightfully evilly good. Mm-hmm. That's what makes it soar. And also that they don't over-rely on him in those 38 episodes. There's a good stretch where he's not there every episode, but, like, you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, because it is definitely, it's important that he's gone for a big stretch, because then I think it would be too tempting to just, like, have every 5 episodes the scene where Char runs into Sayla and they have, like, their little blah and then they depart. You'd have to do that scene like 3 or 4 more times if he was here for the whole Ramba Rouse stretch. But Char and Sayla only actually meet, I think, 3 times so far. And so having, you know, just like it interspersed and getting those little insights into it, I think is what helps the mystery work, because I think also if they revealed Char's sort of true nature earlier in the show, it would rob his character of some of his mystique, whereas we only have 5 episodes left. That means you have to just you can't play around, you can't jerk around with Char's character. You have to just, like, deliver all the beats you need to deliver with him after the mystery's been revealed. And so I think they just play it the perfect way of he gets to be cool and mysterious and weird for most of the show while still managing, you know, and we'll talk about it next time, but I feel strongly having, like, the full payoff of who he is, like, land 100% by the time you get to the end of the show.
Exactly. It's a good example of execution trumping everything else. Because,
yes,
again, no one would tell you, keep that back for 38 episodes, but if you do it right, it becomes better because of it. So
absolutely.
There you go. Then we have that episode, A Wish of War Orphans?
Yes.
Okay, I thought it was a Dream of War Orphans for a second, and I'm like, that'd be weird. But anyway, you know, I like Kika Cats and Let's. I like them an awful lot in the background. I don't know if they needed their own episode, and I think this one just... Gundam has such a careful sense of tone, and it is such a Jenga tower of tone. You know what I mean? Where it's
yes,
like... It feels like it could collapse at any second, and the brilliance of Gundam is that it doesn't. It does not collapse in this episode by any means. But I think there was a risky pull on one of the Jenga pieces, and it wavered for a second. That's how I would describe this episode.
I agree. Yeah, I think it's something where it feels like it kind of feels like, partially because its plot is partially taken from Time Be Still, it feels like an episode from that part of Gundam that kind of got transplanted here into Jaburo. And there's a lot of stuff in it that I think is really good. I think you needed this episode of having all the characters at Jaburo and have it be a little bit more quiet, and you just get to have some really good scenes between, like, Amuro and Fraubo and stuff like that to kind of set places where we're going to go. But the A plot of the orphans and finding the bombs, I think one thing it kind of... I think, like, Char doesn't have a good spot for that kind of middle stretch of the episode where his plan is just kind of dumb and foiled by orphans. I think all the stuff where he meets up with Sayla and then he has a brief fight with Amuro, I think that stuff is good. But just
really good.
Yeah, that middle stretch of the episode when it has to really focus on the orphans, I wish that it was just like a smaller scale thing. I think is mostly it. Like if the war orphans, because instead of solving the bomb issue, if they kind of discovered it and helped Amuro or people instead of them like being fully like in the middle of it and then getting all the bombs and throwing it onto the truck, I think it kind of pushes them too far in a way that feels a little bit unbelievable.
I have to say, like, one of the things that came to mind was it felt like an episode of, like, DuckTales to me, where you would have, the little kid ducks going around and doing the adventure and then getting in the car and, like, driving away. And it could be DuckTales, it could be any Saturday morning cartoon, but it came back to that zone where, like, Gundam is the Trojan horse that looks like a Saturday morning cartoon but sort of isn't. And this one sort of, the mask falls a little bit, because also I think the thematic thrust of the episode is what to do with Kika, Cats, and Let's, because if you are at Jaburo and you have a clear off-ramp for those characters who are 3 little kids on this warship, you have to provide a pretty damn good justification for them to be on that warship when you leave the off-ramp, right?
Yeah.
And that's what this episode is attempting to do. If you have the war orphans literally handling explosive material, then Frau Bo's argument in the end seems awfully petty and short-sighted of her. And I don't know how much we're supposed to criticize the crew of the White Base for wanting to keep these kids on board, but I'm sort of sitting there like, boy, I don't know. If I saw these kids handling explosive material, I'd be like, let's find them a new home. And so, I agree with you. I think if it had been a smaller scale thing or their role in it had been different, then I could buy the ending a little more. It's just one of those places where the stars don't quite align. And again, this is mostly by the own incredible standard Gundam sets for itself that I'm criticizing this episode. It's still a very good episode of television.
Yeah, because I like it a lot. And I like especially all the stuff at the end with Amuro chasing down Char, because this is the part where you were talking about earlier where Amuro just kind of cleaves through all the people that Char's with kind of no real effort at all, and Char just kind of freaks out and bails. And there's a great shot where they're all escaping, and Char's in his Zagok, and then he has another new mobile suit with him, the Ak guys, which they kind of have replaced the Gogs. The Ak guy being one of my personal favorite mobile suits, because it was immortalized in the Gundam Build Fighters anime as the Bear Guy, which is an Ak guy that looks like a teddy bear, and it's fucking great. Google it later, because it's a really good design. But the Zagok and all the Ak guys, like, jump over this, like, cliff and use their claws to, like, anchor onto the ceiling of the cave and swing themselves over, which is just a great little piece of animation. And then, Amuro just kind of cuts through all of them, and Char just has to get the fuck out of there.
Yes, and that is, I will say, the episode where I was starting to realize, oh, Amuro is really good now. Like, that to me is the sequence where you definitively know Amuro this is no longer about being in the Gundam. Up until this point, it has been a mix of Amuro's own skills and that the Gundam is really strong. In that sequence, you are starting to get the sense he could do this in just a Zaku if he wanted. Like, this is not about being in the Gundam. And like, okay, and Char gets it too. Like, that's part of it, is like, if Char's freaked out, we should probably be a little freaked out, right? Because this guy doesn't lose his cool. And that continues into the next set of episodes, all the stuff in space, where like, they haven't played their hand yet and gotten into the new type stuff, I wouldn't say, at least for me going through a first time. Like, I don't sense there's any sort of heightened abilities. It's just that he's really good at it. And it's kind of like, this is what Gundam has done so well in starting with, like, he had no skill at this to this point. I can't even tell you the exact turning point, because there isn't one exact turning point. It's just bit by bit, and I think this is actually part of the formula of the show working really well, that he gets in the Gundam every episode, is that with every episode, the anime staff can do just a little bit to push that ball forward and show us Amuro getting better, so it doesn't feel like a cheat when he's doing what he does in the cave in this episode.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's just that slow buildup of going from where Amuro was when he first fought Char back in episode 2, and Amuro like barely escapes because Char has very little ammunition and none of his weapons seem to be able to even scratch the Gundam, and so Amuro just kind of gets through because they can't even hurt the Gundam. Yeah, now we're getting to the point where Amuro is just like it's not just that he's like being able to pull out the full utility of the Gundam. It's that he's really good, because also remember, he's not fighting Zaku's anymore. He's fighting Goofs and Zagoks and Akais and like all these new mobile suits that have been designed after the Zeons have had ample like encounter time with the Gundam in the white base and have designed a lot of like their, have observed that stuff and then taken a lot of those improvements and put them into their own designs. So all the mobile suits that Amuro is fighting are much more powerful than Zaku's, especially when he's fighting stuff like Rick Dom's in the next set of episodes. It highlights more and more that just how powerful he has become at this point.
Well, and it's a really sly switch for the show to make so gradually and so subtly from the Gundam is the source of power to Amuro is the source of power. Yes. That is like one of, I think, the master strokes of this show, because it really, that's what makes this, like, as much as anything else in terms of the design of the robots, I feel like that's what makes this the real robot show that we were talking in like episode 1 of this show, where you went through like mech shows being super robot shows or real robot shows. I feel like it's less about the robots themselves than the people inside them, and what they've done with Amuro, that to me is what really cements this as its own kind of thing and a new template going forward.
Yeah, and it makes his arc is so satisfying to see, while also continuing to be something that like you kind of don't want to see, because he's like, Amuro's kill count has to be like in the hundreds by the time we get to the end of this stretch of episodes, because he's not just taking down mobile suits, he's also taking down like whole like Musai class cruisers and shit like that are staffed must be by dozens if not 100 people or so. So he's killing a lot of people at this point in the show, and it's a little bit disturbing sometimes, because Gundam continues to do the thing of they don't ever let you just kind of ignore the fact that all these mobile suits are piloted by people. No matter how small it is, they will almost always cut into the cockpit of whoever poor motherfucker happens to be on the other side of Amuro's beam rifle and watches his cockpit just dissolves in a hail of lasers, and he screams and explodes. The show never kind of lets us get away with believing that this is the most convenient version where he's just killing faceless people. All of them like typically have names, they have little character designs, and they all they all don't want to fucking get blown up by the goddamn Gundam.
Indeed. I think it's the end of this episode. We're on episode 30, where Bright gets the news that we already knew they were going to be going to space and meeting up with what's the name of the fleet? The Tianem fleet?
Yes, the Tianem fleet, yeah.
Yeah. We know they're going to meet with that, but he is told that they are going to specifically be a decoy. And that's like our cliffhanger into the next episode, which is called A Decoy in Space.
Yes, so the Federation has set up their plan that the Zeon forces are mobilized at the Space Fortress of Solomon, which is led by Dozel Zabi, who we met way earlier in the show. He was Char's commanding officer before Char killed Garma, and that's what got pushed into Cassilia's kind of troops. And so Dozel's like that big dude. So he's at Solomon. So the TNM, the main fleet, the TNM fleet for the Federation, is going to slingshot around Luna 2. If you remember all the way back in episode 4, when we were at Luna 2 for that one episode, they're going to go around the long way and come at Solomon from the side. And the white base and a couple of other ships are serving as decoys, and they're kind of going through side, like over by where side 6 is and more directly towards where Solomon is. And so to try to get Char to follow them and the rest of the Zeon fleet to focus in on the white base, because they know the fucking Zeons are obsessed with the white base in the Gundam at this point, because they have just managed to completely fuck the Zeons at every single turn. And I think one of those nice things about the whole switch of it being Amuro, not the Gundam, is that the Zeons have no idea that it's not because the technology is so good anymore. It's because not just Amuro, but Amuro and Bright and Kai and Sayla and Mirai, they're all like incredibly effective at what they're doing at this point. And so it's not the technology, it's that they are facing like a crew that has had more combat experience than probably almost anybody else in this fucking war, because they've been on their own this whole time.
Indeed. And it's a really interesting setup, because on the one hand, boy, is that cutthroat and ruthless of the Federation to send the kids out on their own as a decoy, but also that's really good military strategy. And that's something I appreciate about Gundam, is that it has actual, like, solid, strong military strategy when it comes to these things. That's a really smart plan, and it works. Like Char sees through it, but Char's also like, we're still going to go after the white base, right?
Well, because it's one of the only times they've legitimately outsmarted Char, because Char does figure it out, but he figures it out late enough that he realizes if they turn around to go after where the main fleet is, the white base will just turn around and kill them immediately as soon as they show their back to it. So Char realizes, like, oh, like, I have figured out what their plan is, but it's just he's like a minute or two or like a step too late in the process to actually do anything about it, which is a very satisfying moment.
Very satisfying. And again, like, I appreciate the effective military strategy.
Absolutely. This is also, so all the stuff in, at the beginning of A Decoy in Space, you have them leaving Jaburo. And so this is where, one, we get introduced to our American character, even though nobody ever calls him American. If you've seen enough anime, you know all the coding. We've got Lieutenant Slegger Law. Incredible name, Slegger Law. Just fucking, top tier Gundam naming for Slegger Law. And he's this big, blonde, buff American dude. He comes onto the ship basically as our replacement for Ryu, in terms of he's a fighter pilot who's going to man the guns and fly one of the G fighters. And so they leave, and then there's also just this small moment that I absolutely adore, and it's one of the areas where I think the direction and like color palette of Gundam really shines through visually, is when, as the white base is launching off from Jaburo, a flock of flamingos comes flying up next to the white base, and it's at sunset, and all the crew are on the bridge, and they all look out the window. And I love Bright has this like tour guide moment where he gets on the intercom and it's like, hey everybody, there's a flock of flamingos off our port side. If you want to go check it out, like go to the windows. And all the flamingos are flying up. And I believe, if memory serves, I think that's the moment they choose to end the second Gundam movie on, and that's where they play the credits, and it's a very good moment there as well.
It is, because I just downloaded those movies and was checking the files, and I wanted to know where movie 2 ended, so you are correct.
Yes, so they have like a whole insert song that plays over the credits and stuff. And yeah, it's that just like that animation and that shot and that, again, when we're talking about, while Gundam is action-packed and it's stuffed to the gills with like narrative, it always finds moments for these cute little like story beats and kind of like palette cleansers, and that's one of my favorite ones personally.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And we're back in space, and that is really interesting to look at, like, the arc of this show, that we start in space, we spend a lot of time on Earth, and then when the crew, like the crew comes to Earth, not a crew yet. They're just a mismatched, group of mostly amateurs and mostly civilians and kids. They get on Earth, they have all these adventures, and by the time they leave Earth's atmosphere again, they are one of the most effective crews in the entire fleet. And I think that is one of the smartest, like, macro planning things they do in Gundam, is to have this giant middle section of the... It's hard to even call it middle. It's like the first section of the show, because there's only a couple episodes in space early on. But basically, middle section of the show where you are on Earth, all these different things happen, and by the time they get back to where the show started in space, they're a completely different group of people, and so that contrast of seeing them against the backgrounds of outer space is made very stark for us. It's really smart planning.
Yeah, and you can tell that it was like a really, really smart way to structure things, because so many Gundam shows just copy that structure, because it's so satisfying, and it's one of the ways that also you get to just have the cool going from space to Earth and from Earth to space are always some of like the coolest episodes of Gundam, because just cool shit happens with that. But yes, like most Gundam shows choose to copy that structure and have the characters start in space, go to Earth somewhere, like sometimes it's later, sometimes it's earlier, and then go from Earth back into space. And basically almost every Gundam show has like the final stretch of episodes be a big confrontation in space, because space is cool.
Space is cool, and these two episodes are cool. You have the decoy in space, and then Breakthrough is the next episode. Breakthrough is a little light in terms of like it's another space battle, and it suffers a little bit in comparison to the battle against the Zanzibar, which is such a good battle. But I do like these two episodes, and I do like how it sets up the next very meaty stretch, which is at Side 6.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of things that I really love about the fights in these episodes. I think are very good, and particularly in Decoy in Space, you have all the stuff with Sayla and her in the G fighter, and it's because it's an interesting switch of where you had Amuro having to like had that long adjustment period to him having to fight in gravity once they got to Earth for the first time. But then now that they're back in space, Amuro knows how to fight in space. He already fought in space before, and then also Amuro's so good he can just kind of take whatever's coming at him. But Sayla has never fought in space before because she only became a pilot when they were on Earth. So Sayla now has to get used to the idea of fighting in orbit. And they actually, while it's like very basic, they account for some like orbital physics stuff of if you're in orbit around a significant gravitational body, the faster you move, basically the lower your altitude is. So the higher your velocity is, the closer you are to whatever that body is. So if you want to get further away from the Earth, you can't just sort of go really fast. You have to pay attention to where you're moving. And if you slow down, you will actually go higher. And then obviously if you're like burning in a specific direction, you will move away from Earth's orbit. But if you're in the middle of like a big fight, like Sayla is, she keeps on just kind of trying to boost around to get around the enemy and not thinking about like the kind of the macro, what is actually happening. So she keeps on almost getting dragged down to Earth. And all those like little tiny fiddly details they pay attention to is very cool. And it allows Amuro's like scientific experience to shine through and his ability to kind of handle that scenario. And then Sayla, both because she's not used to this kind of combat, and then also she's so distracted thinking about her brother Char that she can't quite get used to this combat scenario at first.
Yes, I love that too, and it's not quite like this is the exact counterpoint to the episode where they land on Earth for the first time, because that episode is entirely concerned with the physics of getting down to the surface, and it doesn't do the exact inverse of that, but we get enough of it to kind of scratch that itch, and I agree. I think Sayla's part of it is the best part of that fight, because anytime someone has to learn on the job, like, whether that be a kung fu anime or a mech anime or any kind of thing, that's always some of the best fight scenes, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, but then otherwise, like, yeah, that I think for sure the decoing space fight is better than the breakthrough one for those elements, and just like it's more because that's the one where they're fighting Char in the Zanzibar, and then breakthrough is where you have Dren, who was Char's second in command from like the beginning of the show. He shows up with his fleet of Musais,
and he stays around for all the side six stuff, right?
No, I think he gets killed at the end of Decoy.
Okay,
or at the end of Breakthrough, I believe.
Who's the villain in the side six stuff?
Because
they're fighting a dude who hates Char, and
that's a different. I don't remember his name. He's just like another. I think he's one of Dozel's like lieutenants, or like he's kind of like one of his second in command, because he doesn't like Char because Char is part of the Cassilia side of the forces.
Right. Okay. So anyway, those are two different. Yeah, Breakthrough I thought was just a tad formulaic for Gundam. It's fine. It's a good episode. I enjoyed it. Just not as much to talk about.
There's a couple of things about Breakthrough. Of one, so this is also the point of the show, because I think the first one we see is in Decoy in Space, is we get introduced to the mobile armors, which are a slightly different class. I mean, they're basically just like big fighter ships, more or less. But so we have some mobile armors, and then we have the Zacrello, which is the weird yellow mobile armor at the beginning of Breakthrough, that like it's like got a big face with fangs on it that the Gundam disposes of in about 3 minutes at the beginning of the episode, which I like. It like the Zacrello just feels like one of those like I feel like the Zacrello probably exists to show just how desperate Zeon is, that they're just throwing every like random bullshit thing they have. In fact, Char has that line where one of the guys is like, "I'm sorry I let Lieutenant whatever his face is take the Zacrello off and get killed," and Char's like, "I don't really care. Like, any machine that I didn't even realize was a part of our fleet and we lose it, like, that's no loss to me." Like, I really like that moment a lot.
That is my favorite moment of that episode. I'm glad you brought it up because I'd kind of forgotten, but I remember laughing like an idiot and like rewinding because Char is such a petty bitch in that moment of like, "Oh, we lost this thing." It's like, I didn't even know we had it. I don't care.
Yeah, it's like this random motherfucker just gets killed, which I had not realized this the other times I saw this. The guy who's the pilot of the Zacrello is in one scene in the previous episode, and I only know that because that character is in the Gundam Versus game as like a mini boss, and so I saw his character design, I'm like, oh my god, that's the Zacrello guy. He's actually been set up in a previous episode. I had no idea. The other thing to say about Breakthrough is I believe Breakthrough is... Oh, wait, no, sorry, this is not Breakthrough. It's a later one, but since I'm thinking of it, I'll make the point anyways. In terms of Amuro being a death machine, This is also where you start getting. He has the episode where the guy at Side 6 has his whole fleet of like 12 Rick Doms that he sends at our crew, and Amuro kills 9 of them, and he's counting, and so he's counting each one through, and the white base. So I think Kai kills 1, Sayla kills 1, Hayato kills 1, and then Amuro kills 9 of them. And the Rick Doms, which used to be like a big deal, and they just cut through that whole fucking fleet in like 30 seconds. And that lieutenant dude's just like, what the fuck happened? Like, how is this even possible?
Because that's, as you said, a different episode, right?
Yes.
Because I had that in my notes to bring up, because that is, I actually have a screenshot of it, because that, all of the 12 Rick Doms coming at them, there's a really great composition with that entire force coming their way. And I have that saved. I have several shots I saved while watching to like use as our art this week. I don't know which one it'll be, but that is one of the contenders. And yes, that fight being, it's like fucking Seven Samurai, where the main samurai in that movie has like his list of like, we know they're gonna have 40 men, and he's like using his little brush to like, okay, we've taken out this one and this one and this one, and Amuro is like doing it in his head, like, that's 1, that's 2. That is a crazy fucking fight. It's top tier Gundam.
Yeah, I can't remember which. I think that must have been when they were leaving Side 6. So I believe probably that's correct. A fateful encounter is probably which one that takes place in. But yeah. So,
isn't that the one where Amuro's dad, who we'll get to, is watching on the TV?
Yes, that's right. Okay, yes, that's when that episode happens.
Okay. So anyway, but all very good stuff. So we should talk about Side 6, though.
Yes. So Space Sweden, Side 6, which is a neutral side, because most of the other sides have been more or less destroyed. There's some piece of narration earlier in the show that kind of lets us in on, like, other than Side 3 is where the Zeons are, and so they're good. Side 7, where we started, is only partially under construction, and then Side 4 is where the Battle of Loom happened. So that's where the space colonies the space colony they drove into the Earth, that one was from Side 4. So most of the other sides are mostly kind of destroyed or dispersed. But Side 6 seems to have kind of managed to have some kind of weird political neutrality that is a benefit to both the Federation and the Zeons, because they have a place to go to, that there's a treaty that they're not going to fight at. So they just kind of let Side 6 be neutral. And this is convenient because we get to have our kind of like our shore leave episode of where everyone gets off on Side 6. And a lot of shit happens. We get introduced to a lot of fucking stuff in this section of the show.
Again, I think Side 6 is like, they're there for 2 episodes. I can't really remember because it feels like they're there for a lot longer.
It's 2 episodes, 33 and 34. A farewell in Side 6 and a fateful encounter, both are Side 6 episodes.
But man, it's I actually think now looking back, it doesn't matter which one is the 12 Rick Doms, but it's I forget which one exactly it was. But anyway, yes, those are both, because they do get attacked in both cases. And it's Captain Konskon is his name.
Yes, you're right.
But anyway, yes, these 2 episodes are so fucking eventful, and so much happens, and they're very, very good. I also just love all the details that they give to Side 6. Like, again, there's a level of detail in Gundam that it does not need to be a good, like, solid show, but I do feel like constantly elevates it by adding all this around the edges to make it feel like a complete world. So, for instance, they get to Side 6, and as they're coming in, there are these crews that put tape over all their weapons, just to show, like, if these seals break, we'll know you used weapons, and we know you will have broken our treaty. And then they get in there, and they show, and the narrator even has a line about this, that, like, as the further you get into Side 6, there's this big rotating area that creates artificial gravity, and it's basically like the Halo or something, you know?
Yes.
And it's like this little Halo world, and you have gravity, and you have weather, and all this stuff, and it's got a little, nightlife scene in the town, and there's more of a country area, and that's part of why I feel like Side 6 is more episodes, is because there's so much environmental variety in the course of where they go in Side 6. But the show sets all of that up, and it really does feel like you could do a whole 50-episode anime about people living on Side 6 just based on the details we get in these 2 episodes, and that's wild.
Yeah, because while we started on Side 7 was not a fully finished space colony, and so Side 6 is the first time we've been to, like, this is a proper space colony that is, like, at peace right now, and the people are just, like, living there, and so, yes, you get that really great just bit of animation with, like, the diagram and the narration of when they're at the dock, which is in the middle of the space colony, there's no gravity, and then they take this like super, I forget how, like they say how long the elevator is. It's some super ridiculously long elevator to get to the arms of the colony that are spinning for gravity. You have that moment when Amuro, before he meets Lalah for the first time, he's driving his buggy, and he like says like, "Ah, goddamn it! Like they should have at least given us a like weather report, because of course of course they would need weather for all the plants and everything. They need to have rain. That's just the most efficient way to do that. But so they would eventually just have like, here's like our scheduled weather planning for the day, and all of those little details." Especially when you remember that this was in 1979, so it's like there's not necessarily a huge amount of other things that are doing this kind of sci-fi at the time, particularly like anime and stuff like that. It's really impressive, just the meticulousness of the world-building detail they have, that, as you said, is not stuff that's strictly needed, but adds so much flavor to everything that happens.
Yeah, because obviously Mobile Suit Gundam exists in the post-Star Wars boom, but as we've said before, there's a reason why he has a giant fucking beam saber in the Gundam. But, like, this is the interesting thing about Star Wars is not sci-fi. It's fantasy, it is pure fantasy, it's space fantasy, it has really no sci-fi elements to speak of. It is space fantasy. And yet, you do get, because of that, it looks enough like it might be sci-fi that you can get Gundam to kind of come in under the rug, and it's much more influenced by something like 2001 than it is by a Star Wars.
Oh, you have no idea.
Okay.
We'll get to 2001 Space Odyssey next time, but yes.
Yes, but it's much more influenced by that, and so it is straight up hard sci-fi, but it can also have some fun beam saber action too when it wants to.
Yes, yeah, Gundam definitely has a really good balance of, I mean, it's honestly more hard sci-fi than Star Trek has ever been. Like, it leans like pretty hard into the hard sci-fi direction.
Well, down to like, Star Trek does not give really any thought to how artificial gravity works on their ships, which I don't, that's fine. Star Trek can do that. But I do love that in Mobile Suit Gundam, there's just no gravity on the ship. Like, they have to, like, strap themselves in, and when they go down the hallways, they have those little, like,
the
rails that, like, the handles that take them along the rails and all of that.
I love the handles so much. You only see them a couple of times in this show, but they're all over the place in Zeta Gundam and Double Zeta Gundam, and I love every time a little fucking handle pops out of the side of the hallway, and they just grapple onto it and just fly down the hallway. It's the best idea for how you travel around a spaceship I have ever seen in anything, and if humanity ever gets its shit together and we actually get into space, I desperately hope that is what we do, because that looks like so much fucking fun.
It does. It does. Yeah, I feel like Kika, Katz, and Let's should just have an episode where they're just zooming around on those for fun, and Bright comes in and has to, like, slap them away, be like, stop that. But anyway, I got distracted. But yes, all these great details. But then, a lot happens on Side 6, including Amuro meeting his dad. Sean, you had told me that we would see his dad again. That this would come up. You pointed out he does get sucked out into space. Just remember that. I'm like, okay, I'll remember that. I thought when we saw the dad again, in my head, I built it up like he's going to help them figure out something about the Gundam. He's going to have invented something. He's going to... No, that's not what happened, Sean. He had extreme oxygen deprivation and he's not all there anymore. And whenever Amuro meets his parents, prepare to cry, because they're not good reunions.
The whole sequence is unbelievable, of just like how it's put together. Because Amuro is out shopping with Frau Bo and the chef from the Salt episode earlier. And so they're at like the grocery store at night, and it's got that great 70s, like it's got this very like Sailor Moon looking nightlife with just like these weird bloom lights that just are kind of all over the place. Or it looks like the some of the stuff from like the ending animation of the original Dragon Ball in that at night and that kind of stuff. And so he sees his dad get onto a bus, and Amuro goes running after the bus. And then I think this is maybe the only time they play this track. They play an instrumental version of the Amuro theme, I think, from the end. That's like a very peppy, happy version of the Amuro song. And he's running after the bus, and it's playing this very peppy, happy song. And then the dad gets off the bus, and Amuro reunites with him, and Amuro's so excited and happy and is overjoyed to have seen Tam Ray, who we have not seen since he got sucked into space in episode 2, which nobody else noted that he got sucked into space. He just wasn't there anymore. And something seems slightly off about him at first, because he's just not... He sees Amuro, he's just like, oh, hey, Amuro. And Amuro's like, hey, Dad, wow, I can't believe you're alive, right? It's like, oh, good job, Amuro, your pilot. The Gundam's okay, huh? And it's like, yeah, no, Dad. Yeah, the Gundam's fine, Dad. Okay. And then Amuro follows him to this, like, dingy little apartment where you see that Tamray is just working on this like, fucking VHS player-looking piece of shit, and he gives it to Amuro as, like, this, like, oh, like, put this in the Gundam. Like, this will upgrade. Everything will be better. Like, I've made this perfect thing. Like, everything will be great. And then Amuro has this, like, internal narration of, like, you're handing me an antique. And then Amuro realizes, oh, he must have suffered oxygen deprivation, that he doesn't have any idea really where he is or what he's doing. And that, like, slow, that just, like, the fucking knife twist of Amuro sees his dad in this big reunion moment with happy music, and then you realize this is, like, the saddest possible conclusion, the saddest way that Amuro could have ever meet his dad again. The guy who invented the Gundam, who is now, like, salvaging parts from a scrapyard and making junk that he thinks is something that's going to make the Gundam better. It's so tragic.
If he had just died, it would have been easier. If he had never seen him again, it would have been, he died in the battle, and that is horrible and sad, but it's easy to understand. It makes sense. This is not. And yeah, it is one hell of a knife twist.
Yeah, it's brutal. And because I remember, like, I so distinctly remember the first time I watched this show, and, like, that moment, and feeling like, because I had just, like, happened to notice and kind of pay attention to that little beat in episode 2 where his dad gets sucked into space, and I had no idea that detail would be, like, so critical and, like, become something that's important and, like, something that the show actually followed up on in the most fucked up way possible.
Yeah, boy howdy, it's fucked up, and it is sad, and poor Amuro, and it also, though, shows where Amuro has come as a character, in that he doesn't tell anyone about it. He keeps it in. He's able to kind of get back into the groove when he gets back on the ship and they have to go fight. Like, he's starting to have that soldier sense of being able to compartmentalize, which he did not have before.
Yeah, which is both, like, it's again, it's the weird thing, the weird, like, balance of Amuro's character, where you're, like, happy to see that he's not, like, totally devastated by this, and you're happy to see that, like, Amuro is able to go forward, and if anything from this point on, he's even a more effective soldier than he was. He seemed to have been able to sort of, like, in some ways, this has almost been, like, a weird unburdening for him, of where he's, like, Amuro has nothing. Like, he can't go back to his mom. He can't go back to his, like, there's nothing for him there, and so Amuro has kind of cut everything else out, and that makes him a really effective soldier. But especially as you get in, like, from this point forward, you get these, like, a couple of moments with Fraubo or characters mentioning his relationship with Fraubo, and you start to realize how distant Amuro has grown from everyone else. That's, like, it's good for him as a soldier. It's clearly not good for him as a human being, though, that he is, like, dealing with it this way.
No. So, yeah, poor Tamray. We do see him in the following episode. He is watching TV during the big battle with Scone's, whatever his name is, forces, and he is very proud of the Gundam, but has no real sense of what's going on. And that's, I assume we don't see him again?
Nope, that's the last we see of Tamray.
Jesus fucking Christ, this show is brutal.
Yep.
But the following episode, A Fateful Encounter. Oh, good God. Oh, good God, this is a good episode, Sean.
Yes.
Because this is where you meet Lalah, who, through the end of these episodes, we still do not know a ton about, but clearly is going to be an important character.
Yep.
And Amuro has some kind of connection with her. She is some kind of psychic. And then Amuro meets Char face to face. Char has no idea who he is, but Amuro meets Char, and that scene... that scene, Sean, I will say, I remember... I watched the previous episode, Farewell Inside 6, and that is such a sad episode. And I got to the end and I'm like, I'm not going to be able to watch anymore tonight. That was too brutal. And then the next episode preview comes on, and it shows Char and Amuro in the same scene together, and I'm like, fuck, next episode, yeah. Right now, skipping the theme song, I want to see that. Let's do it. And it does not disappoint. Char is so great in that fucking scene.
There's something so brain-twisting about seeing Amuro and Char as people standing next to each other in the same shot. It's so good. And yes, like, I just love the way they play it of Because Amuro's 15 years old. So, of course, like, Char doesn't think anything of this, like, random kid that they're both in uniform. So he, like, knows that Amuro's a Federation guy. But, like, Char doesn't give a shit, obviously. Like, Char doesn't give a shit, one, because Char doesn't actually give that much a shit about the war. We know that. We know he's more after the zombie stuff, and he has his own kind of plans going. But then also, it's this kid who Char thinks is probably just, like, a nobody. But Amuro immediately realizes it's Char, both because, Char is dressed in head to toe in black and red. He's got a big weird gun sword thingy on his side that I don't think he ever uses that thing. I'm not sure what it is, but it sure looks real cool. And he's got his fucking mask, and he's got, like, all of his rank, like, insignia. He's got all this, like, he's just dressed to the nines all the time. I love Char. And then also, because this is also with all the Lalah stuff, you start getting more directly the implications of weird kind of psychic-y stuff going on. And so Amuro, like, has this moment of realizing, like, how am I so confident that that's Char? Like, why do I know that that's Char? I've never actually met him before. But Char just kind of plays the whole thing off, and he's kind of laughing and puts the fucking, like, the hook on the other car and, like, gets it out with Lalah. And he just kind of, for Char, it was just like a random encounter that he's probably just going to forget immediately. For Amuro, it's like one of the most frightening moments in his entire life.
But there's also just the attitude with which Char carries himself in that sequence down to the end where he, like, admonishes Amuro for not thanking him.
Yes.
Doesn't he? Yes. Uh-huh. And, like, because, like, Char's just like, yeah, okay, there's someone stuck in the mud, I'll give him a hand. I don't care if they're Federation. Like, that's just what you do. You know, it's like, it's just, okay, this is fine. This is as much as Char shows compassion for other people, basically. And, but yes, for Amuro, it's like, he's about to have a fucking heart attack, because I don't know if Char could take Amuro in the Gundam, he could probably take him in real life.
Yeah.
Because again, Char has his fucking weird thing on it, as you say, the, like, beam sword coming out of his belt, and Amuro is relatively unarmed. So it's a tense sequence. It is a hilarious sequence. It is, and it's something you need going into this last stretch. You need to have them go face to face for just a little encounter, because also it sets up. I assume there's going to be a moment where Char realizes who's in the Gundam in the final five.
That's an interesting theory. Yeah, might happen.
I assume that'll happen. And if, like, to set up Char going fully ape shit, which is still my prediction, he has to know, oh fuck, it was that kid I helped out of the mud. So that scene is great for what it is, and also for what it portends to come later. I love it.
Yes, it's very good. And then also you have, I love that the scene where Amuro first meets Lalah, because it's just like, because this is where, just to kind of, like, talk about the new type stuff a little bit. So one major change that the movies make is that they use the word, I'm pretty sure they use the word new type all the way in movie 1. It's definitely all the way, it's all over movie 2. And so they just kind of more directly use that term and that phrasing and make it more explicit. And then Zeta Gundam and Double Zeta, basically all the other Universal Century Gundam stuff, is very fixated on the idea of new types and what that means, with all the weird kind of psychic stuff. In Mobile Suit Gundam, I love how strange and esoteric and bizarre it feels every time it actually happens, and it just gets kind of in your face with it. And so Amuro meeting this strange, like, weird lady who's just, like, in this big flowing dress, and they both are watching this swan as it is flying in the rain and then dies in mid-flight, and Lalah kind of predicts it's happening and says, oh, you poor thing, and then the swan falls, and then Amuro looks at her, and they have this weird conversation where he says, like, oh, did you like that? Was that like a swan that you liked? And she says in her head, is there anybody who dislikes beautiful things? And then that line echoes like 4 or 5 times. And then she says out loud that line phrased slightly differently. And Amuro just has no idea what the fuck is happening to him. And there's just like this weird, bizarre kind of psychic something that's happening here. And I just love how esoteric and kind of upsetting it is. And so with, like, the first time we encountered that kind of stuff, Jonathan, what was your kind of, like, feeling and impression of that sequence?
It definitely struck me. I was a little weirded out by it in a good way. I didn't fully know what to make of it yet, and I'll be honest, I still don't, because because we had that, during the Battle of Solomon, he has a big moment where he like sees like this image of like a demon or something
Yes.
above the enemy suit, and that's above. I think that's when he's fighting Dozel, isn't it?
Yes, that's when we'll get to it. But yeah, it's the Dozel stuff.
Yes. So we have all of that, and then obviously everything that happens in Texas. There's a lot of it, but it's Texas, the space colony, not Texas, the United States. Love it, love it, love it, love it. Okay.
So good.
But anyway, so I'm starting to get it, and I generally have a sense of where they're going with it, but it is a giant stylistic departure, obviously, to do something like that. It is intentionally kind of fucking with you. I'll also say it immediately made me think, and I assume this had to have been an inspiration for Gundam now that I'm thinking about it. Have you ever seen the movie Horus, Prince of the Sun from 1968?
No, but I know what you're talking about, yes.
Okay. So that is Isao Takahata's first film. Isao Takahata, later co-founder of Studio Ghibli, died last year. Horus, Prince of the Sun was his first feature film. It was with Toei Animation. Hayao Miyazaki, that was also the first movie he worked on. That movie is, in many ways, the Citizen Kane of anime, because it is like the movie that, like, that's the birth of anime as we know it, is Horus, Prince of the Sun, in terms of cinema stuff. Like, you could go Astro Boy on TV, you would go Horus in film, and, like, Horus just sets down all these different things that anime start taking from. One of them is the kinds of, like, interesting, dynamic female characters anime will have. You have embodied in the character of Hilda in Horus, and Lalah is Hilda, like, in 3 or 4 different ways. Like, oh, wow, that character is, like, very influenced by that archetype that they set down there in Horus. This, like, mysterious girl with some kind of strange powers who the male protagonist meets and is kind of entranced by, but she has some kind of association with the evil character. Like, it's a very direct call to that in some ways. But also, Horus is fucking weird and experimental in the way Isao Takahata was throughout his career, and it will go on kind of interesting avant-garde tangents. And I felt like that the way Gundam does it feels like one of the avant-garde tangents that Takahata would do, and I just felt like they were bringing some of that in here. So I, like, directly enough that I do assume it's an influence on this, because this is 10 years later, and Horus would have been an influence on a lot of things at this point. But, like, that is the main association I made, but it's definitely like a sit up and notice moment. What's interesting is that, again, the show does not say the word new type, and if there is foreshadowing for it, I missed it, and I assume you know where it is because you've seen the show 3 times.
Yes, and it's I think it's something where you're kind of meant to miss it. And so, I mean, because I'll just say the first time it comes up is way back. The first time we meet Matilda, she comes onto the ship, and she's talking to the White Base crew, and she's talking to Amuro, and she says, you must be some kind of, like I don't know how you do what you do, Amuro. You must be some kind of Esper, which Esper is like, it just means psychic, and I've never encountered that word. Like, it comes from, like, ESP, extrasensory perception. I've never seen that word used in anything other than anime, so I don't know why it doesn't get translated, because I feel like it's a Japanese-English word. But she says that, and then there are just a couple of moments of when, like, you know, when Mirai says to Bright when they're discussing whether or not to take Amuro off of the Gundam, that I get the sense that there's something special about him. Like, that's more than just, he seems like he's good at this, because also Mirai, as we get some hints of it in some of these episodes also, like, Mirai has some sort of weird, like, premonitions also in different parts of the show. Like, Mirai has a moment where she has a premonition of Matilda dying, because when in the episode where Matilda dies, she just comes up on the deck, Mirai looks at her, and Mirai just gets this really shocked look on her face for no reason, and then just kind of wipes it off. And so there's these little moments pieced throughout the show that, again, I think the first time through, and the first time I watched it, I didn't pick it up really. You're meant to kind of dismiss it, and then on a second viewing, it all kind of comes into place, and you're like, oh, this has actually been here the whole time. It's just nobody has known what it was, and so nobody has had a way to refer to it and kind of make it more explicit. And I like the way that Gundam handles it that way.
I do too, but I will say I had to think about it for a little bit, because getting to this point where they are starting to seed that there's something, like, genetically, I don't know how it works, but something, like, different with Amuro that gives him the power to do these things he's doing, and it's not just he got better and better and more skillful. That at first threw me for a little of a loop to think about that, because I was trying to decide, especially introducing it this late in the game, that could very easily feel like a narrative betrayal. You know what I mean? Like, that could, in lesser hands, feel like a cop-out. And I don't think it does. And I think it's exactly what you're saying, that even if you're not noticing the foreshadowing, it is there. It is not completely out of left field. But I think it's also important that our primary POV of Gundam is Amuro, and Amuro doesn't know about it.
Yes.
And so, like, him meeting Lalah, and even though he has been steeped in this because he's using whatever this power is, him recognizing it for the first time, that being the first time the audience truly recognizes it, I do think is smart. And the more I think about it, the more I like it. But it is like, it does intentionally throw you for a loop. Amuro is being thrown for a loop. I think it is the right decision, but it is a bold one, and especially this close to the end. That's part of why I had that text to you, Sean. I'm like, how the fuck are there 5 episodes left? Because they have just, especially in the Char and Sayla episode, where you are full on learning that Char's entire plan involves picking up his father's mantle to try to build a nation that can, like, bring these powers out in people, and, like, it is this central to it. Like, it's a huge bomb to drop on the audience, but that's part of why I like that they introduce it with the weird shit first, exposition second.
Yes, yeah, and I like the way that, because Gundam will continue to, like, this show chooses to represent the new type stuff in weird ways that are hard to grasp, because I think, like, the concept is something that's meant to be something that you can't actually understand, right? Because it's something that's beyond human, and I like the way that the show chooses to represent it in very weird, esoteric ways. So obviously we'll get.
I'm also now, Sean, I'm at a point where I totally understand what you mean when you say everyone talks about Evangelion, but Gundam did all this shit first. Because we've now, again, I have not seen Evangelion, but through the ether, I know certain things it is famous for. I believe we've checked just about every box on the things Evangelion is famous for Gundam did 25 years earlier.
Yes. Yeah, it's exactly okay. Some of this stuff is some of that stuff that's like, and Ava's like a good show and worth watching and does its own stuff.
I'm not putting it down. I'm just like the reputation of it.
Yes, but yeah, if you're someone who's never seen Mobile Suit Gundam or Ultraman and like that some of that stuff, and you watch Ava, of course you're going to think it did all that stuff first. But like, I mean, Hideaki Anno would be the first person to tell you that he was hugely like Gundam was hugely influential to him in his career.
It's nothing against Ava. Ava came out here before Gundam did. Like, yes. That's just like Ava has always been more popular in the West than Gundam has.
Yeah.
So like that's
we're talking about episodes. Actually, we're like this stretch of episodes is the stretch of episodes that on its original airing runs into 9/11, and so then there's like an 8-month gap or something from I think it's Duel in Texas and the Char and Sayla episode have a huge gap between them from the original English airing because the Duel in Texas came out on September 10th, 2001. So.
Jesus, and you mean it's Cartoon Network American airing?
Yes, so like, which is like the first like time that most people would have seen Mobile Suit Gundam that's when that would have been. Which is
this show had bad luck when it aired in Japan and America, didn't it?
Yes, yeah, it's very weird. So that's some of that Lalah stuff. Also, though, because there's another whole plot line that's going through with this Side 6 stuff, because this is also like Mirai's kind of set of episodes where she has a lot of stuff here, because we learned in Jaburo that she has a fiance because she's Mirai Yashima. She's the daughter of like a famous politician and businessman, which is stuff that you kind of hear around the edges about her character. That's kind of how we're introduced to her in episode 2, is the captain knows who she is or who her family is when the captain, like the original captain of the White Base, knows who her family was. And so now we find out that she had an arranged marriage with this guy, Cameron Bloom, which is I like the name Cameron Bloom because it's a very normal name. And so Cameron Bloom is on the ship with Bright Noah and Slegger Law and Sayla Mass. And it's like, here's Cameron, which is great. But yeah, so we have this whole other subplot of Mirai kind of having to navigate her own feelings between him, Bright, because there's obviously a thing between her and Bright, like there has been for a while. It's not been focused on. And then this new weird dude, Slegger, who's just kind of hitting on every single woman he sees and is this weird alpha male kind of figure. How do you feel about all this stuff?
It's interesting. I like it a lot, and part of what I like about the plot with Cameron Bloom, which I agree it is relatively normal, it's still like 5 degrees off from a name you would actually give someone, and so that's what makes it fit perfectly in with all this. It's just not 90 degrees off the way Slegger Law is.
Yes.
You know? But again, I have all my favorite baby names now are from Gundam. You know, I'm gonna name my kids Job John Lack and Slegger Law Lack.
God, Slegger's such a good name.
Anyway, but what I like about Cameron is that he's a good dude.
Yeah.
Like the tension they build between him and Mirai is not anything that is wrong with either of them, really. It is a fundamental incompatibility in what they kind of want and where they are in life, and that Mirai, again, like, this is, for every member of the crew, we've had these moments where they encounter their own off-ramps, you know, which is Amuro early on in the Coming Home episode, Kai in the episode with Miharu and everything there, where he could have just stayed in that Ireland area. You have Sayla in an upcoming episode, Char trying to get her to tank an off-ramp, you know. But they have all become part of this crew and they don't want to leave. And this is, why am I forgetting her name? I'm stuck on Miharu. It's Mirai. There we go.
Yes.
Sorry. I almost wanted to call her Mitsuru for a second. That's not it.
Yeah, that's
so
definitely
Mirai,
not it.
No, but Mirai getting her own moment here where she has an off-ramp as well. She doesn't even have to be at war at all. She could be living on Side 6 with Cameron Bloom and completely detached from all of this. And what it shines a light on is sort of one of the larger themes of the Side 6 episodes, which is the pacifism of Side 6 and refusing to take a stand. And that if Cameron has an ultimate weakness, it's that he isn't taking a stand. He does want to help the white base out because Mirai is there, but Mirai wants to end this war. Cameron kind of wants to propagate the non-aggression of Side 6, which ultimately is not really helpful to anyone.
No, and you have that moment when Char, another great Char moment when he's leaving Side 6 and Cameron's there and Cameron's kind of being petty and please get off Side 6 now. We don't want you people here. And then Char's like, hey, don't get too uppity, Cameron Bloom. Like, the only reason why Side 6 is able to be neutral is because it's convenient for us. As soon as Zeon decides that Side 6, like, its neutrality is not useful, we will fucking kill all of you. So, you know, yeah, Side 6 is neutral only because it's convenient for the powers that be that it is neutral. And its neutrality is a problem. Like, this is not a small confrontation. This is a war that has killed half of the human population over the course of its fighting. So, like, in that context, Side 6 passivity is problematic. You know, it's like, This is a war that needs to be finished, and it probably should be won by the people who aren't yelling Sig Zeon and are weird space Nazi people.
Exactly. It's Mobile Suit Gundam is anti-war in a lot of ways, but it's also very realist in the sense of, like, if there's gonna be a war, pick a fucking side and do something. Because one of the worst things you can do, as we've learned in politics recently, is centrism.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's that old adage that the only way for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing. And, like, that's kind of the situation that Cameron Bloom is in. Like, there's nothing wrong about this dude. He's clearly a nice guy. And in a world where the 1 year war never happened, there would be probably nothing really wrong with him. But in this scenario, he's not doing anything to help anything, and that's a problem when all this tragedy is happening.
Are you surprised he lives?
I constantly forget that he doesn't die. In my memory, he fucking gets blasted. In that, because there's the part where he flies out with the ship, and to kind of help shield the white base, and he kind of keeps on pushing it to the limit. And in my memory, the first time I watched it, in my memory, for whatever reason, he died in that section. I think because that feels like the thing Gundam normally would do. But I like that he doesn't die, because I think that makes it way... Like, that's in many ways even more cruel, because that makes it so much harder for Mirai. Because if he was just dead, that possible future for herself would be literally completely cut off. Instead, it's a thing that she actively has to keep at bay. Like, she has to fight any desire to go back to this guy, and, like, make that very easy choice to live that life. And I think that's probably why Tomino didn't kill him off, because it's so much more cruel not to kill that dude to our cast of characters.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree. So, but it is like, it feels like they are setting up the kind of death that we see in other episodes, and we're about to see with Slegger in the next set. But yes, anything else to say about the side 6 episodes?
I like them a lot. It's such a good. It's such a unique feeling set of episodes for Gundam. Like, there's nothing else in the show that feels quite like what happens with Side 6. Both aesthetically and just, like, narratively, kind of some of the places they push it. It's very cool. I like this stretch a lot.
I do too. But then we get the Battle of Solomon.
Yes.
Which is really the first full-blown giant battle we get thrown in the center of, because there is the Odessa Day stuff, but we mostly just see our characters' little parts in it. We don't see the full-scale war. In fact, it specifically aligns it with the narrator. This is 2 full episodes, balls to the wall, giant battle scene, pretty much from like the beginning of that episode, Glory of Solomon, to the end of the Big Zam attack episode. Like, it is the battle, the war. You see the whole thing. A ton of shit goes down. People die. It concludes with our first big insert song in Gundam. It's wild. And it's so good.
Yeah, because just like so much shit happens in these episodes. So one, we have a character I personally love a lot, Dozel Zabi, my big weird scarred Zabi man, who's just like he's sort of a Ramba Rao-esque figure in that you see clearly that like he cares about the people that fight for him, and he's like trying to make the best choices for them possible. Especially when he decides, when the Big Zam makes its last stand, like he decides to kind of do it alone and kind of go down with the ship, but have everybody else evacuate. And so he clearly cares.
He's very caring towards all the civilians on his base too.
Yes, and he has a wife and daughter, Mineva Zabi, who Mineva is an important character for the future of the Gundam franchise because they escape. And so you have this one little Zabi girl baby. There's that beautiful little touching character moment where he's with his wife and telling her like, hey, get ready, like if something happens, we're going to have everybody escape in capsules. And when he's talking to her, Mineva wakes up and starts crying because he's this big dumb guy, and he just like every line he says he kind of shouts a little bit, and so he wakes up the baby, and I like that moment. But then also I just like all the preparations that Dozel has to make on Solomon. And so you have the one guy telling him like, oh, we have the Big Zam here, which Big Zam, what a good name. Such a good, it's a big thing. It's a Zam, it's the Big Zam. And so they have the Big Zam, which is another experimental mobile armor. And Dozel's just like, why do we have that thing? Like, how come Girin isn't just giving us like 20, like Rick Doms? Like cool. Yeah, we have a big experimental thing. And this is one of the things where you start to see the downfall of Zeon is they get so spooked by the Gundam that they're just wasting all their resources building like a million different individual projects instead of just having, here's a shit ton of these like goofs or Rickdoms or whatever it is you just settled on. Whereas the Federation, they have their Gundam. The Gundam's cool, but we see that they have taken the Gundam and made a mass-produced version of it called the GM, which is one of the Federation mobile suits. And so the Federation just has a million of these fucking like rip-off Gundam things, which is what they need. It's not about we have like the one really good machine. You need a shit ton of machines. You need a lot of stuff to fight with. And Dozel just has almost nothing other than they got the Big Zam. And that's like what he has to fight with.
And the Big Zam is very good. Just not enough in the end. But yes, no, I love Dozel Zabi too. All of these battles and the big encounters work when you have a really clear antagonist at the center of it. And this is another case of having Dozel there really works. We don't know him extremely well, but he is, I think, a very effective antagonist, and I love his presence in these 2 episodes as the big force to overcome, and a lot of crazy shit goes down. But I do love having that side, and that it still feels human. Like Dozel is not someone you want ultimately in power because he is from the family of space Nazis, but he feels like a real person with real motivations and also genuine good qualities in him as well.
Yeah, so I like him a lot. Because he also has a lot of good stuff in the Origin prequels, and he's very good in that also. So you have all that. I also just like that Zeon is holed up in this giant like asteroid base. Like they hollowed out this asteroid, made a big base, and called it Solomon because Zeon is very problematic politically, but they've just got such a good sense for names. The Big Zam, this is space-based Solomon. Like it's just good shit. But then you have the whole assembled fleet of the Federation, and they have their GMs. They also have, this is something that I always forget that these appear so late. One of my personal favorite I guess they're technically mobile suits, which are the balls, which are just the big spheres with huge fucking cannons on the top and little tiny arms, which I think they're basically, in the lore, they're supposed to be like the precursor to the mobile suit that the Federation had, but you don't see them until this point. And so there's just these big fucking metal spheres with cannons on them, and it's such a good, dumb design. And yeah, it's just this massive fleet, and the white base is in the middle of it, and you have absolutely everybody out there. You have Amuro's fucking shit up, Kai is fucking shit up, Sayla's fucking shit up, Hayato does his best, and Slegger Law is out there fucking shit up. And this is where you get that full sense of, because of how big the scale is, you get a better sense of how effective the white base is as a full crew, as a full like fighting unit, because their ability to kind of organize and take down enemies, it's not just that Amuro's really good, it's everybody is kicking ass. Like Kai takes down like 3 or 4 mobile suits in this fight. You know, Sayla takes down a bunch in the G Fighter, and that's an aspect I really like, is being able to see everybody in one episode contribute so much.
Absolutely. This episode also has one of my, well, both of these episodes, but the first one, The Glory of Solomon, has one of my favorite moments of just, I don't know, a little artistic panache, where it's after the episode break, our favorite little moment of shoo!
Yeah.
You have the battle going on and the narrator comes in. And I took notes down on what the narrator said, because this is one of my favorite pieces of writing in Gundam so far. He says, "Life or death. No one knows the outcome until the very end. The only certainty is that with every beautiful sparkle in the sky, people, or even hundreds of them, are becoming debris littered through space." Whoa! Sean, whoa, that is a piece of writing right there, my friend. Wow.
Yeah, that's like peak Gundam. Like that's what Gundam is that idea of like, oh yeah, like this, like there's something very cool about seeing this giant space fight with lasers, and then you remember, oh, and then like 100 people just died because that fucking space cruiser just exploded. Oh right, this is fucked up.
And I think that piece of narration is what brings us out to, like, from the battle out to the full Federation forces, the Bane fleet that did the run around Luna 2. What do they have planned? And we meet the big weapon in this episode, the solar system, which helps deplete Zeon's forces. Now, Sean, I'm going to have to ask you to give me the big technical explanation on what the solar system is, because I feel like I got most of it. It's this big mirror system that they're using to reflect a giant blast onto them. But there's so much technical stuff behind this, and you tend to know what it is, so I want to know the big technical analysis of the solar system.
So the solar system is the execution of there's an old legend about the Greek scientist Archimedes, that he was able to create a death ray using mirrors to basically light ships on fire. I believe the Mythbusters ultimately proved that was not something that could have been done, and like it could not have been done with that technology. Probably couldn't be done with our technology. It's been a while since I saw that Mythbusters episode, so I don't remember what they concluded. But anyways, there's like it's an old myth that Archimedes was like created this device to burn ships using mirrors, and that's, I think, just the basic concept of the solar system. Is they are able to execute on that idea, one, because they're in space, and so the atmosphere does not absorb the most of the solar radiation, which is what, this only way we're even able to live on Earth is because our atmosphere absorbs most of the solar radiation. And so they're out in space, and they just have like 100 of these massive mirrors attached to satellites. And so they're not reflecting a laser, they're just reflecting the sunlight at a focused point. And so you see they have when they cut to like the sort of operating center for the solar system, they have all these scientists with like this like visual of all the mirrors, and it shows that they're going to align them so that the sunlight hits a singular point at Solomon, which is why it doesn't just blow up everything along the way, is they're aiming it so it kind of converges at one point. And it's basically like, it's like burning ants with a magnifying glass, only instead of an ant, it's an asteroid base. Instead of a magnifying glass, it's a million giant solar panels, and they're all floating in space and being aimed with like super precise mathematical accuracy. And that's what they use to just blow a massive hole into the side of Solomon, and also disintegrate a bunch of the Zeon fleet.
It's pretty wild. If I'm not mistaken, the whole mirror array thing, though, we also see on the different side bases have something like that to create light or something. Because I know in Texas we see that.
Yeah, so they have, yes, so the space colonies have mirrors that they use to, I think probably that they also use it to like power stuff, but that's also how they generate a lot of their light. And that's the thing, that's what detail that we learned about the Texas colony, is that the mirrors in a battle got misaligned, and so that's why the Texas colony is all fucked up in the middle, is because the ecosystem's totally destroyed because is not getting the right amount of sunlight. Either it's getting too much or too little or however much, and it's just destroyed the ecosystem entirely because they're using sun or giant mirrors to do that. So yeah, it's probably, that's a good point. It probably is the same kind of mirror they would use on space colonies, but they just like assembled a giant array of them to create a beam.
Well, because I really like that implication that this is something the Federation built for peaceful purposes to assist living in space, and they are now using a modified version of it to create death on a massive scale. Like, that is like very human history 101 right there.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. So yeah, the Federation has assembled this giant death ray made out of like the sunbeams, and they just blast the shit out of Solomon. And like Solomon was already like probably going to fall because they were understaffed, but this is like the deciding blow that pushes Dozel completely into a corner, because the integrity of the Solomon base is now compromised, and Amuro is able to get inside because of it.
Because at this point, he has called in reinforcements. He's called in Kycilia. We see in one of these episodes, Char even gets the call and is on his way, but they're all too far away.
Yes.
Because the Federation was just too well prepared for this. Dozel was too understaffed. Zeon was too egotistical, basically, for this. They were too full of themselves, and now it's all falling, and we get to the second half of this battle. And I feel like here, Sean, we should probably take a pause and talk about Slegger Law.
Yes.
And who this character is, because he's a really interesting character in Gundam to me. He obviously dies in this episode, and we'll talk. He's the big death of this two-part battle. I mean, Dozel also, but Dozel's not one of our ostensible heroes. Slegger's an interesting character, and I still am not entirely sure how I feel about him, and I feel like that might also be entirely by design.
Yeah.
When he was introduced, it totally made me think of, one of my favorite TV shows is the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which was on the CW, and it's that show, it's a musical show, so they had songs in every episode, and near the end of the second season, they introduced this new character, Nathaniel, who becomes one of the main characters of the show, and is a really great character, but when you meet him, you think he's just this like kind of annoying, blonde pretty boy who's like introduced to like boost the show's ratings, and they make it a joke by having a song called Who's the New Guy? We Don't Like Him, and it's all about like the meta of that, and I totally was singing that song in my head when we met Slegger, because that's kind of what it feels like. But of course, Mobile Suit Gundam is smarter than the average show, and so I think he becomes more than that character. But we never get to a point where we are fully, I feel like, meant to like Slegger, where we are meant to like fully trust him or know exactly who he is. He has this really weird dynamic in that he is the oldest, military man on the ship. He has more experience than Bright. He's been there longer. He's kind of talking over people. He does sort of ingratiate himself into the crew, but only so much. He's also harassing people and hitting on people. He literally slaps Mirai. I think he slaps several people. I forget all who he slaps. But and then he does have a heroic death. He has a kind of out of left field romance with Mirai before his death. He's a really interesting character, and I'm curious what your take on him is, having sat with the character for longer.
Yeah, I think his role in the show is utterly fascinating because one, it is this like, what if like a normal military officer was part of the white base crew, is part of the point of him. It's like, we have sat with all of these kids, and like the only people that were like active characters on the show that were actually members of the military that are on the white base crew are Bright and Ryu. And Ryu had like 4 months of training or whatever, he had never seen combat. He had only been in simulations as a fighter pilot. And then Bright was like an officer in training kind of guy who was like never really did much, and obviously was like very bright. Bright, but he went to a military academy, all that kind of stuff. So like in theory he knows what to do, but he doesn't actually have the experience. And then you have Slegger Law, who is a lieutenant. He's the same rank as Bright is. Bright obviously technically outranks him because Bright is the captain of the vessel, so Bright can give him orders. But in terms of the military hierarchy, he's technically the same rank as Bright. He's much older than any of these people. And he has way more combat experience. So in some ways, like, he's like a reliable character to have around in that sense. Like, he's one of the reasons why they're able to fight off Char in the Zanzibar in the episode when they go into orbit, is because he's really good at manning the guns, and he actually gives Bright some advice of like, hey, like, let's use our inertia to keep on going forward, spin the ship around, and I'll man the main guns and try to hit the Zanzibar that way, and all that kind of. So he's got that experience and he's got that talent. But at the same time, he's sort of like crude and boorish in this very kind of like, you know, military brat kind of way of like, you get the sense that this guy probably, his dad was in the military, his whole family's been in this, like, that kind of situation. He's grown up in that kind of culture. So he's definitely an asshole in many ways. When he slights Mirai, like, that's one of those like really shocking moments on the show. Even if like, because the reason he slaps Mirai is because that's when Cameron's saying, hey, I will get in the ship, I will help shield the white base, and Mirai's saying, no, you don't have to do that, which is a dumb thing for Mirai to say, because like, they should take whatever help they can get, and Mirai's letting her personal feelings get in the way of the safety of the white base. And so like, that's not a reason to slap somebody, but that's like, so, but I think the point is that Slegger Law, he's an asshole. He is not delicate. He doesn't kind of know how to treat people in a nice way, but he's not necessarily just bad. Like, he's got good ideas. He's got this kind of experience. And that little moment you have where Mirai and him have this like weird moment where, so Mirai is clearly like kind of unhinged because her whole like future plan of eventually marrying Cameron is gone. Like, she's thrown that away. She obviously has a thing with Bright, but that's probably too like serious of a like her feelings for Bright and Bright's feelings for her are clearly like too serious and real, and she doesn't want to actually move on those because that's scary. And so then you have this big fuck boy just here hitting on everybody. And so like, her going to him in that moment of like extreme loneliness and emotional vulnerability makes a lot of sense to me. And I like that his reaction to that of being like, you don't know what you're doing right now. Like, this is too emotionally charged, and he tries to put distance between them. There's something really interesting between that moment of like, the character dynamics there feel so like real to me. It's not like staged TV romance. It feels like this is the kind of shit that like gets people into bad relationships in real life and that kind of stuff. And the way that he kind of fits in that dynamic, I think you're right, that I don't think you're supposed to have a like so totally settled feeling on like pro Slegger Law, like no Slegger Law, like, is this guy good or bad? But his dynamic nature in the middle of the cast and what he does to kind of change the dynamic of the ship, of we are now a part of the military. This is the culture and the world that we are now a part of because we are official part of these forces. He is such a necessary part of the show.
I agree. And I think the episode has all of that. And I think the ending with the insert song, which is gorgeous, and it's also very contemplative, and I think you have a lot of characters not sure how they're feeling. It's because it is this big victory. They lost a crew member. That's sad. They barely even knew this guy, though, which is a different kind of sad. And you're sitting with all of that, and it is something I love that this episode does, is it just gives you that 2 or 3 minutes at the end of the episode to sit with it, you know, where the show invites you to sit in those feelings. And in the middle, we get the battle with the Big Zam, which is fucking crazy.
It's so good. I mean, just the build up to it, where you have Amuro like going through the corridors of Solomon, and he keeps on hearing on the radio like these other GMs and balls encountering the Big Zam and just getting immediately evaporated and screaming like, it's a monster. And I'm just like, what the hell is going on? I need to check this out. And there's one shot in particular of him coming across like the half melted remains of a bunch of different mobile suits in like the Big Zam's wake. And that's just a really great shot and moment of like, it goes like pseudo like space horror for a second of like, oh my God, like what the fuck is doing this to all these things? And it's the Big Zam. It's the big egg with legs is basically what the Big Zam looks like, but God, is it cool.
It's so cool. It is so overwhelmingly powerful. And then the way Amuro and Slegger beat him, where they do this very risky maneuver. They get in close. The Zam pulls off the cockpit, which like rips off the part of the G-Fighter where like you see the Gundam's face, and Slegger is just ejected into space. And then Amuro, the series of shots where he gets out in the Gundam, pulls out the beam saber, jumps up, is up above the Big Zam, and then comes down. I rewatched that like 5 times in a row. It's so good because for a second I thought they were cutting to the mid, what do you call it?
Eye catch.
The eye catch again, because it is the same as that first shot where you go really close in on the hilt as he's pulling it out. So it starts with like basically that same shot as in the eye catch, but then it's in the full episode and he jumps up and there's the big hero shot and he comes down on it. It's nuts. And it really is what we've talked about before with this show, where when it does a big action moment, it can do it in just a couple of shots, like just a couple of frames sometimes, and it is so tight and impactful. And good God, it's a great action beat, and also one where you're like, right, there's something up with this Amuro kid, because that was fucking insane what he just pulled off.
Yeah, because it's also, I think it's like a really good payoff of like the modular nature of all the Gundam stuff, of where they, the Gundam, like one way that Gundam does like to save time and budget is by reusing the docking animation in the middle of episodes. Which is fine. Like every anime show needs to do stuff like that. So they dock in the middle of that fight and then go up from below the Big Zam and try to shoot from under it. And I like because it's also because then the cockpit, it gets grabbed, but then Amuro, while they're still docked, grabs the beam rifle with the Gundam and starts shooting the beam rifle up under the Big Zam, which was part of their strategy. So he gets a couple of blows under the Big Zam and kind of penetrates its like undercarriage. And then that's when Slegger Law gets fucking ripped into space. Amuro's like, Slegger Law, you killed him! And then he ejects, jumps up. Yeah, big like wide hero shot comes down on the Big Zam. But then you get Dozel Zabi doing the most badass fucking thing ever, which he just climbs on top of the Big Zam in a spacesuit with a fucking assault rifle and just starts shouting, "You will not defeat me! You will not defeat me!" as he just shoots the Gundam with a fucking assault rifle. And then Amuro's looking at him and is like, what is that guy doing? And then that's when Amuro gets his weird premonition or like new type thing where he sees this giant like pulsating black purple shadow behind Dozel Zabi that's just like some sort of like manifestation of this guy's rage and just like power, and Amuro is so intimidated by it at first that he just like fucking explodes the entire Big Zam just to like kill this one guy. And it's such a just shocking like powerful sequence of events, and that moment where Dozel just decides to just get up on the fucking Big Zam and start shooting the Gundam is such a cool idea that's while we have not known this guy for very long, that so sums up who this person is, that like this is how far he will take it. Like Dozel Zabi fighting for the wrong side, but that dude is legit as fuck. Like that's a guy that will go like to the nth degree to do what he needs to do to fight in this war.
It's very, very good. As I said before, the end of the episode with the insert song and just the contemplative nature of that ending, I think is beautiful and really, really powerful. And then, here's the thing, Sean. We've talked about a lot of good stuff today. We haven't come to my favorite 2 episodes yet. Mm-hmm. Because these last 2, A Duel in Texas and Reunion, Char and Sayla, oh my god, they're good.
Yes. Because I just want to say, The Duel in Texas is a cool name for an episode of television when that's a name for, like, a Western show or something. It's an absurdly cool name for the title of an episode that is a mech sci-fi show. And I just remember so distinctly the first time I watched the show and getting to The Duel in Texas and being like, that sounds so cool. That's such an awesome title. And The Duel in Texas is one of my all-time favorite Gundam episodes. It is just an incredible... It's one of the most, I think, like, well-directed, well-put-together episodes. Some of the visual imagery and editing in The Duel in Texas is just incredible.
Well, it's so good because there is a literal duel where you have the 2 big mech suits go at each other. but that's not that long. Like, that's pretty brief at the end of the episode. What so much of it is like the cat and mouse game and the positioning, and you have Amuro going through all of these tunnels. It's kind of like in the previous episode against the Big Zam, but it's even, I think, creepier here where he's trying to get into Texas, and there's all, it's just the kind of back and forth between them, and I have to say here, this is where I have to talk about my favorite Gundam mech, is the Gion giant, I don't know how you say it. It's Gyan. The Gyan, which is Makuve, because Makuve comes back here, he gets in the Gyan, and it looks like if a knight from Dark Souls became a Zeon mobile suit. It looks like if Solera of Astoria became a fucking Gundam mech, and it's only in one episode. It doesn't need to be anymore. It's too cool. If it were in any more episodes, it would just overwhelm you. You would have a heart attack, because that fucking giant suit with the like domed helmet head, and it's like Makuve literally had it made for him as like a fucking ego project. I love it. I love how this becomes like a full-on sword fight. It's so good.
Yes, yeah, the Gyan is another, that's a personal favorite of mine for designs as well. Like, it's a really popular one too, because it's in every game I've played. It's one of the suits in Gundam Versus and stuff. The Gyan, yeah, it's such a, because it's a really great looking suit, and it's also like 100% the suit that Makuve would have made for himself personally. Like, it so speaks to that dude's character that it has like a weird fencing beam saber, and it's got this shield, like kind of buckler shield with a bunch of missiles embedded into it. And just like the knight helmet with like the little point on top. It's very, very cool. And just everything about this episode, it's like this, the build up and the setup is so good and methodical, because this episode opens with the narration of that the White Base and everybody are kind of on a mission to mop up the remnants of the forces at Solomon, and they are around like they call it the shoal zone, but it's like all this debris around where I think it's at side 4, I want to say is where Texas is, whichever side that Texas is at. And they're around the Texas Space Colony, which was a colony designed to raise livestock and for like leisure. And so you find this is like one of the things about Gundam is not all the space colonies were designed only for people to live on. So the Texas colony was both like we're growing things and like animals and raising livestock here, but also it was like a sort of like a Gundam universe theme park where you go to like the old West town and all that kind of stuff.
It's like Gundam Westworld.
Yeah, I mean basically that's what it is. And you go to it's a really good part of Gundam the Origin is there's some stuff set on the Texas colony before the war happens, and you get to see like what the colony was like in its kind of heyday, and it's very cool. So yeah, you have all this stuff of like the Texas colony is such an atmospheric setting for an episode. And the space around it that is full of the debris of other space colonies. And then the Texas colony itself was meant to be this kind of leisure park, but has now fallen into disrepair. And it's just these like wild fucking windstorms constantly. And most of the vegetation is just dead and decayed. And there's just kind of wreckage all over the place. And that's the area that they're fighting around. And so Makuve sets all these traps to lure Amuro into the colony. And those series of shots of Amuro coming up to the colony, and there's this wide shot of the Gundam just dwarfed by the scope of how huge the hangar is, and the Gundam casts this massive long shadow like down into the depths of the hangar of the Texas colony, of the entrance. Like all of those are some of the most like a beautiful evocative shots I think the show has. And then him getting into it and seeing like the wreckage of the colony and how the mirrors have been misaligned and everything. Like it's one of the coolest settings that Gundam has ever arrived at, and everything about the Texas colony I think is just astoundingly cool.
I agree with all of that, and I think the specific sequence of events that Makuve's plan is we're going to leave like breadcrumbs in the form of other mobile suits to lead the Gundam in so I can fight him. You know what it reminds me of is Empire Strikes Back.
Yes. With
Darth Vader trying to get Luke in to fight him, like luring him in, and the Gundam coming in closer. And the difference here being that Luke didn't have like special psychic powers that allowed him to overcome Vader in that moment. But like, it depends on what you call the Force. But anyway, Luke was not a new type. He was a Jedi.
Luke has not murdered like 200 people the way that Amuro has at this point.
Yes, that's very, very true. Well, Luke did fire the final blast into the Death Star.
That doesn't count. That's
Okay.
like Amuro has personally killed dozens of people. If you don't want to count like the hundreds of extra casualties from the battleships he's exploded single-handedly.
Yes, very true. Okay. Anyway, we're getting off track, but it definitely has that Vader versus Luke vibe. It's a great duel in part because of everything you said, but also just the build up to it and learning the setting and going through it. And then the other half of the episode, which then becomes the final episode of this stretch, is everything with Char and Lalah on the planet. And they're like riding around in a horse and buggy, which is just, I fucking love Char in a fucking horse and buggy is great. And Char trying to help Makuve, and Makuve is basically doing this just to show up Char. Like, Char has effectively pissed off everyone in the Zeon military, and is one by one leading them to their untimely deaths, which may or may not be part of his plan. And so I think that whole side of it is great. There's just so much drama going on. I agree. I think out of these 13, this is my favorite episode. And just because like as an episode of television, it is fucking impeccable start to finish in terms of its direction and pace and purpose and where it has everything arranged in the hour. Or in the half hour. It's really damn good stuff.
Yeah.
Then you get to the duel, and it's so good.
Yeah, because this is also where you get introduced to Char's new red mobile suit, the Gelgoog. Other also great name. He doesn't do much. He doesn't do much until the second episode, but you just get that. You do get an incredible shot of of when he gets into the Gelgoog, and Lalah is there in like a jeep, and you get this like almost like 2014 Godzilla style shot of like the Gelgoog from below, from basically what Lalah would see, and it's this massive towering thing, and it's a really cool shot.
And at the end, he like dives down to stop her from the explosion of Makuve's suit.
Yes.
Do you remember? That's also very Godzilla-esque, I agree.
Yeah.
Oh, really good stuff, yeah.
This is also, I think, the episode where you get Char's line of Char explains why he never wears the, like, normal suits, the space suits that all the pilots wear. And he just says to the guy, it's like, no, I rely on my combat abilities to survive. Like, if I was going to die, a normal suit wouldn't stop it anyway, so I might as well just wear my uniform. And it's just, like, the most Char just, like, bragging, fucking asshole, great shit. Yeah, all of Char's stuff in these two episodes is fantastic. But yes, then you get the proper duel between Amuro and Makuve, which is the... I think this is like one of the only like proper kind of like sword fights. Like that's a more common thing in other Gundam shows. Generally, Amuro just kind of there's not a lot of like clashing of swords in Gundam. Because I think that's one of the reasons they try to keep it more realistic. It's mostly like the other major one you have is with the Goof in Ramba Rao. So the track records for sword fights in Mobile Suit Gundam, very, very good, because this one is great. This is also where Amuro starts he uses both of the beam sabers at the same time, which is cool. You have a shot where the Gyan and the Gundam are fighting in front of like these oxen that are just like rampant, like stampeding away because they're afraid of the Gundam. So you get kind of the perspective of that as well. All just the shots and the material and the like progression of events of this duel is just some of the best put together stuff in Gundam.
Yes, and I have just sent you a couple of screen grabs I had from this when I was looking at it the other night.
Yes.
And they're just so good. Like, just as you say, like, the fencing sense of the Gyan I really love, because it does look like this big fencer robot, and the Gundam is trying to figure out how to fight it. I've got a couple here of just them, the line work and everything in the animation is so freaking good. The way they play with the light off of the beam sabers. Oh, man, and I do love the point where Amuro just gets both out and is fighting with both of them. It is incredible stuff. Right up there with the Ramba Ral fight, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. You get that great series of events where, like... Because this is where, like, Makuve realizes there's something up with Amuro. Because this is where he says, in the narration, like... Are his instincts just really good, or is he some new kind of human being? He doesn't use the word new type, because they literally say new type in English in Gundam, but he like, this is the first time you like kind of directly set up this idea that there's something else going on here very directly. And so then Makuve starts getting more and more desperate. You have that great shot where he's just stabbing furiously at the Gundam, and the Gundam's just dodging every single stab he has. And then then Amuro goes in for the kill because then all at the same time you have Lalah watching the fight up on the hilltop, and Lalah's getting all this weird new type stuff as well, and like this weird synergy with Amuro, and they play it like it's like radio interference or something. Like you get this weird static in the soundtrack, and Amuro's like, "What the fuck's going on?" And Lalah's just like, "What the hell is happening?" And then when Amuro goes in for the kill, that's when there's like Lalah sends some sort of weird psychic message to him of like, that's enough, stop. And of course Amuro doesn't quite stop, because then he just kind of cuts the Gyan in half with both the fucking beam sabers. And then Makabe gets such a, like, this is like a classic kind of iconic line that is quoted a lot in the Gundam community, particularly in Japan. I've seen it referenced in different shows. As Makabe is exploding, he says, like, well, I forget the guy's name, but he's like second in command is like, make sure you send that vase to Cassilia. It's priceless. And then he explodes, and you just get this white shot of that like beautiful like vase decanter that he's always had with him, because he's this weird antiques dude. And then he explodes. It's just like, oh my god, it's so good.
That's a pretty great light line to go out on, thinking about the vase.
Yes.
Oh man, it's amazing. I also, while we're talking about the explosion of Makabe, I have to point out something I have not yet mentioned on these episodes, but I have consistently loved about Gundam. The way they animate explosions on Mobile Suit Gundam is superior to every other explosion I've ever seen, because they do it so colorfully and artistically. It's not realistic at all the way they do it, but it is so representative with all these big oranges and purples and pinks and blues, and they just billow and billow. You could almost like cut these all out and make a very avant-garde like film out of them. They look almost like a little, not many people will get this reference, but like some of the little paintings Stan Brakhage would do, where he was an American like experimental filmmaker, where he would just paint onto 8mm film strips directly and like make the paint really thick, and then when you ran it through a projector it looked like hell exploding on screen. It kind of looks like that to me. I fucking love it. I've never seen anyone animate explosions like they do on this show.
Yeah, they're absolutely fantastic. Yes, that the shot of the Gelgoog flying up and landing right in front of Lalah to shield her from the explosion is really great, because it showcases, because all of that is silhouetted by this massive orange and purple explosion. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. But then we get the Char and Sayla episode, and I guess here we should talk about finally learning the origins of Char and Sayla, and that Char is Space Hamlet.
Basically, yes. So Char... We'll get back to the Char and Amuro fight later, but near the end of the episode, he jumps into the car with Sayla, and you get the full explanation, which Bright also... This is like a good bit of plotting that I think helps kind of elide having to explain a lot of this information again later, is Bright overhears all of this on the comms. But yes, so the story that Char tells is they were raised by Jimba Ral, the father of Ramba Ral. Jimba Ral's just, great name. And so that's, that kind of puts together all the stuff we had with Ramba Ral and encountering Sayla. And the reason why they were raised by Jimba Ral was because they are actually the son and daughter of Zeon Zum Daikun, who is the guy who founded the Republic of Zeon, which was what Zeon was before it became a principality. Zeon Zum Daikun had a philosophy which was that as humans expanded into space, they would eventually reach a new plane of potential and become a new kind of human, and he called those new types. And nobody knows like what new type, what that actually really means. That's just like, this is a thing that's going to happen, is what he predicted. Eventually, Zeon Zum Daikun unexpectedly dies. On his deathbed, he points to Degwin Zabi, the patriarch of the Zabi family. And this is what Jimba Ral tells Char and Sayla, was that well, everybody in the Degwin Zabi played it off, everyone bought this, that what Zeon was doing was indicating who he intended to be his successor, and then Degwin then goes on to turn the Republic into a principality, which is just effectively a dictatorship. But Jimba believes that actually what Zeon Zum Daikun was doing was pointing out the man who killed him. And so that's why Jimba took Char and Sayla, who are actually Casful Daikun and Artesia Daikun, and took them into his custody to raise them under different names on Earth. And then at some point, Char has joined the Zeon military to get revenge against Zabi, but then he tells Sayla that that's not all he's doing, that he's also trying to create, he's trying to live up to his father's legacy and nurture whatever this new type thing is. And so that's part of what he's doing with Lalah, is that at some point he discovered this girl that to him is clearly must be a new type.
And we also, I think, can assume that whatever his larger plans, he wants to do something with the Zeon past the Zabis to further his father's legacy. I kind of got that out of there, too.
Yes, yeah, and that's... Yeah. So like, for him, defeating the Zabis is part of what he wants to do, but it's not, like, the end game. It's not over with that.
Because it adds a really important piece of context, which is, because before all we really knew about Char's motivations is that he hated the Zabis. If that was his goal, he could join the Federation and help a lot there, right? Yeah. This makes a lot more sense, doing it within, because he also wants to reshape it and probably reclaim his rightful throne, you could say. And that is my read on it, at least. But yeah, it's Space Hamlet. His dad died, the dude who killed him took the throne, and he wants that dude dead. And his whole family. It's a little different because it's a little more dramatic in a lot of ways. But yes, and Sayla, obviously raised by Jim Morale on Earth, wound up joining the Federation accidentally in episode 1 of this show. And yeah, it's a really great exposition dump that does not just feel like an exposition dump, in part because they blow through that whole explanation, I think, faster than you said it on this show.
Yeah, it's very efficient. And then I just also love all the imagery we get of, like, Zeon Zim Daikun on his, like, deathbed pointing to Degwin. Like, all of that is really good. And then I like it's also, while, obviously we never met Jim Morale, it's all narrated in Jim Morale's voice. Like, it's like a voiceover from this other actor. And so the way they, like, play all of that, I think it's really evocative, but also very efficient.
Yes, and it rewrites so much of the show in so many interesting ways. I was genuinely surprised. They had been calling her Princess Artesia. I didn't know what she was a princess. If she was a princess, I guess that means Char's a prince, but I had not connected the dots that they were literally the heirs to Zeon, you know? Like, that is I had not thought that big. So I thought it was a really effective reveal in that way. And man, I see why you chose this to be our last episode for this stretch of episodes, because that lays such an incredible gauntlet. That plus the new type thing and revealing those in tandem. This feels like the right moment to give us all of this. Set such immense stakes for these last, somehow, 5 episodes.
Yes. Yeah, and it's because then I also just love all the stuff it does with Sayla's character of her, like, she now kind of realizes that how far gone Char is, or Castful to her, Castful Nissan, that she's never going to be able to probably get him back and bring him to something that's like a sane way to live a person's life, because infiltrating the Zeon military and, like, rising up the ranks while slowly trying to sabotage them so you can take power back and try to follow in your father's legacy is not a normal thing for a human being to do. But Char, of course, is not a normal person. So yeah.
No, he wears the fucking... And I also love just the explanation for, okay, this is why he wears his incredibly flamboyant mask.
Yes, he discarded his past, and because it's also, like, he and Sayla both have these, like, very striking blue eyes. So that's, I think, one of the reasons he has to wear the mask is because if anybody sees his eyes, they might realize that he's the son of Zeon Zim Daikun. I also like that this then makes so much sense of why it's called the Principality of Zeon, but it's led by the Zabis, which was something the first time I watched the show, I was just so confused by why it would be that way and why it wouldn't be called, like, the Zabi thing, and instead it's Zeon. It's like, oh, okay, that's why they took what was a democracy and then took it over and twisted it into this dictatorship. So all that stuff, great. I just also love, like, Bright has some good reactions. I love when the Char says the word new type, and then it cuts to Bright. It's like, new type? What the fuck are they talking about? And all that's really good. It's such a dense dump of information, but it's shocking how well Gundam is able to just sort of, like, push through it and make it all clear and make sense.
Absolutely. I want to talk about Bright for a second, because I noted last episode of Weekly Suit Gundam, not of Mobile Suit Gundam, that I was really curious where they were going to take Bright in the aftermath of all the death and destruction of the previous set of episodes, where Bright was literally out of commission out of like grief and panic for a couple episodes. And it's a subtle thread through these episodes, but I do like that Bright has clearly become a better commander because he is more attentive to his people.
Yes.
Like, that is a recurring theme. You get it a lot in these last few, because there's something going on with him and Mirai, but I don't think you even have to read it fully romantically. It's also partially just like, I really like the moment where he says, you know, we're in the middle of a battle. I'm not supposed to be talking to you one-on-one, but I can tell something's up. Like, Bright last episode wouldn't have done that for anyone on the ship.
Yes, exactly.
And he does it here. He does it for Sayla. He, like, or for what happened, it's not for Sayla, it's for Frau Bo. He can tell she's, like, getting tired. And so, because that's the thing, that's the contrivance, you could say, that gets him to, on the comms, to hear the conversation. But it's also a really good character moment of, again, the Bright of earlier episodes of Gundam was not attentive or smart enough in his attunement to his officers to see that Frau Bo could not be pushed any further, and that it was healthier to get her off the bridge for a little bit. Like, he consistently does that. He's better with Amuro. He's better with other characters. I like all of that a lot. They don't have to shine a heavy light on it, but it's there.
Yeah, because and I think it's smart because they have so much other material to go through. I think it's smart that they don't dedicate, like, here's like another big Captain Bright episode. Instead, as you say, it's just like a lot of smaller things. And yeah, like just the imagery of Bright sitting in the captain's chair with the commed headset on, like that's just a great shot, and like it communicates so much about how far this character has come, how much more relaxed and confident he is. Because also at like, I think it's the first episode of this batch, he has this great little moment where Amuro is practicing like the docking maneuvers and stuff like that, and he has this thing of like, what's going on, Amuro? Like, how come you can't get this under 17 seconds? And one of the guys in like the crow's nest shouts, says like, oh, come on, Captain Bright, like it's probably actually impossible to get it shorter than that. And he says, even if it's impossible, Amuro can do it. And so his going, like, where he is with Amuro now is he's no longer afraid of Amuro. He has like utmost confidence in what Amuro can do, and him, like, you know, no longer being afraid of Amuro's like potential and what Amuro is capable of, and instead like kind of embracing him is really good. And yeah, like it's a subtle thing throughout these episodes, but it's definitely there. And it feels like Captain Bright has become the captain that he needs to be.
Yes, indeed. And then we do get a final fight with Char and Amuro, but it's not quite a fight. It's not a duel. They don't like enter the same frame. It is Char testing Amuro. He's like, there's something up with this kid. Let me fire a bunch of shots no one could possibly dodge. Shit, he dodged all of them. Oh, fuck. Like, and that's basically how that fight goes. I think it's a really interesting fight, and I liked it a lot, because it also, it's not something I would have predicted, that, you know, you start out the series, episodes 1 through 5, you have a duel with Char in every episode, and Amuro is way behind, and he's only surviving by the skin of his teeth because the Gundam has better armor, right?
Yeah.
You go many episodes ahead, he's going to fight Char again, and he's lapped Char already. Like, that's one of the incredible things. That is not something I would have expected, and now for this final 5, I feel like the drama is really going to be in, what is Char going to do to overcome Amuro, not the other way around? Yep. And that, to me, is kind of a more interesting version of this as a climax.
Yeah, it's something I love, is that you don't ever get the fight between Amuro and Char where they're evenly matched somewhere in the middle. It's by the time they've met again, Amuro is so far beyond what Char is able to do as a mobile suit pilot. Even if Char is clearly is still like a better tactician on a bigger level, like Amuro, part of like what makes Amuro so effective is Amuro's like so focused on what's right in front of him, and like whoever is in front of him is just going to die immediately because Amuro's just that good at piloting the Gundam at this point. But yeah, like by the time you get to this duel, Char, or like, you know, I mean, it's not even really a duel because Char just has the drop on him. Sure, like Amuro is confused and lost in the Texas colony, and he's just kind of, you know, perplexed by all the weird Lalah stuff that's happening, because you have that great moment where Lalah and Amuro are both like feeling things out as new types, and then Lalah just said, Mao's like, mu no, and then it cuts to Lalah, or to Amuro, he's going, la, and then they kind of feel each other, and then he kind of follows her, and so then Char gets the drop on him, and as you said, Amuro is immediately able to dodge a shot from the back from more or less point blank range that should have just been impossible for anyone to dodge. He dodges that. Char goes into hiding. Amuro doesn't know where he is, but very quickly Amuro is able to piece out where Char is, get the drop on Char, disable Char's mobile suit, destroy his weapons, and basically break one of the Gelgoog's arms, and then Char only is barely manages to escape, has to set off a dummy mobile suit explosion to try to slow Char or to slow Amuro down, and then abandon the Gelgoog and get into a car and drive the fuck away because he knows that he just can't fight Amuro toe to toe. That he needs to come up with a better plan, and that is such a satisfying place to have arrived at, and not have having not seen the middle point makes it so much more dramatically interesting to have seen. It's no, by the time these guys encounter again, they are on exactly the opposite foot, and if anything, the Gelgoog is probably a higher performance mobile suit than the Gundam is at this point. But Amuro is able to easily dispatch of Char.
Yeah, it is dramatic stuff, and I continue, Sean, to wonder how the hell I'm almost done with this show. And I'm also sad because it's so good, and then I remember there's 50 billion other series of Gundam, so if I want more, there's plenty fucking more where this came from. But still, how the hell are there 5 episodes left, Sean?
It's like I said on the text message, is shit gets real, Jonathan. There's if you think that the phenomenon of it feels like they must have spent 5 or 6 episodes in Jaburo or something, that gets dialed up to 11, particularly for the last 4 episodes. There's a lot of stuff that happens. Before we get to looking ahead, a couple of other things I want to touch on from these episodes is I think while Fraubo never quite gets the Fraubo episode, she has a lot of really interesting character moments in this stretch of episodes where you see, and it's partially from Fraubo and other characters talking to Amuro about her, how distant they've become, and how it used to be that Amuro and Fraubo would have a couple of scenes together in every single episode, and then all of a sudden you realize they haven't been in a scene together for 3 or 4 episodes in a row, and other characters start commenting on that happening, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I like her. She's taking on a new role on the ship. She's at the comms now. Everyone's shifted around a little bit. I'm very curious what the payoff with that character is going to be, especially her relationship with Amuro. But I have faith that they'll get the ship there. In the end. Because
there's also that really great scene with her in Hayato after Hayato gets injured in the Battle of Solomon, and she's helping give him a blood transfusion, and they have that talk about, or Hayato says, because Hayato is another character that never quite got the Hayato episode, and he doesn't, none of the last 5 episodes are the Hayato episode. Spoiler. That would be, there's not enough time to just have the Hayato episode, but he has that thing where he says, all this time I've been hoping and trying to find some way to beat Amuro, to be better than Amuro, and he's always kind of comparing himself to him, and then Frauba just has this moment where she looks at him and says, Hayato, don't. He's different from us. He's just different. And that, how cold that feels is, because it's not wrong, but it also just there's something about seeing their friendship slowly kind of come undone is one of the very small sad things that they just pick up on over the course of Gundam, and seeing just she's not wrong. Amuro is different, but it feels sad that that is something that causes him to lose sort of this relationship he had.
Yeah. Anything else?
Gundam's good. New types are cool.
Gundam's very good. We have one left. One batch of episodes, although we should just tell everyone our plans.
Yes.
There will be 2 more episodes of Weekly Suit Gundam, because next time we're going to cover the final 5 episodes of the series, do what we've done. And then for our final episode, part 6, we are going to look at the movie trilogy of recaps that they did.
Yes.
And we'll also, I assume, just do some wrap-up material. I still want to do our list of top 10 Gundam names from this series.
Yeah, we should come up with some top 10 lists to do. Because yes, the name one is good. We should do a top 10 list of episodes also, because there are.
Oh God.
Yeah, because I think that would be a fun, hard list to do. But yeah, because I'm very excited to watch the movies, because I've never really properly watched the movies. I've only seen, kind of skipped through them and seen some of the new bits and rewatched some of my favorite scenes. I never watched all 3 of them all the way through properly. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to do that.
I'll tell you, I'm excited to do it because I already am at a point where I want to see everything again with the context I have now. The movies will be a perfect way to do that. I feel like it'll help me digest the series to see the story again, and it'll have a slightly new angle on it, but I'm excited to see it in that way. I've got those movies at the ready, and yes, those will be our last 2 episodes, for now, of Weekly Suit Gundam. So 2 weeks from now, we'll have the final 5 episodes of the series, and then 2 weeks from that, we will have the 3 big movies. So exciting stuff to come. But for now, this has been a great set of episodes. Excited to talk about the next one. I am very excited to just go watch the final 5.
Yes.
What about you, Sean?
I will say the last 4 episodes, like the next episode is good, but it's the last 4 episodes are spectacularly good. I will say, Jonathan, just in case, I don't know how you're planning on watching the episodes, make sure you watch episodes 40 and 41 together and 42 and 43 together, because those are 2-parters.
My plan was just to do all 5,
yes,
honestly.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
Sit down. Mm-hmm. Okay. I was going to make a night of it, get a pizza, do just a 2-hour watch-a-thon of Gundam.
That's a good idea. But for listeners, that would be don't stop at episode 40, or don't stop at episodes 42, or make plans where you're only going to have time to watch one of those episodes, because those are definitely episodes that you need to watch together, because I think they build kind of maybe not as much as the Solomon one is quite literally a 2-parter, but they are very much 2-part episodes that people should watch together. Very excited for that. I'm very excited. Jonathan, if you think that we've had some good Gundam names up till now, wait till we get to the space fortress of Bawaku, because that's where we're headed on the next episode of Weekly Suit Gundam. And as always, we have to wonder, will you be able to survive?